Reporter is here and ready when everybody else is.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'll wait a few more moments for anyone coming in. I apologize. I'm about 2 minutes late to join myself. So we'll get started shortly. All right, as far as I can see, everyone is here from in the waiting room. So I will go ahead and get started. I believe where we left off, Mr. Cooney, is that the next step is for you to present your next witness, which you can tell me whether that's Mr. Hampton or Ms. Williams, and we'll go from there.
That will be Mr. Dave Hampton will be our next witness.
Wonderful. Let me change my view so I can see if I see Mr. Hampton on the screen here. I see you. Mr. Hampton, if you would please raise your right hand for me. Mr. Hampton, do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Mr. Cooney, you may proceed.
Very good. Thank you, Hearing Officer Coonsey. Good afternoon, Mr. Hampton. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
And everything working Zoom-wise? You can hear us well enough and see everything?
It appears everything's working properly.
Perfect. Can you please state your full name and business address for the record?
Yeah, David Hampton, last name Hampton, 33380 Coelho Extension, Bakersfield, California, 93308.
Very good. Now, prior to this afternoon, did you review your written testimony, which is North Kern 67, and all of the referenced exhibits?
Yes, I did.
Did you find any changes that you wish to make to either your written testimony or exhibits?
No.
Okay. If Ms. Mullen could please pull up North Kern 68. Great. That's perfect. Thank you very much. Mr. Hampton, you can see North Kern 68 on the screen. What is that?
That's a copy of my current professional resume.
And does this resume provide a current summary of your education and experience as a water resources manager?
Yes, it's current. The resume is just only a summary of my work and experience with water management for Buena Vista Water Storage District, Coelho Water District, and currently as the general manager for North Kern. Over the last 14 years, I have a considerable experience with regard to the Kern River and water resource management in the region.
Well, that's fine. We've got the full resume in your exhibit. In interest of time, I'm going to actually just go into your examination. If we could pull up North Kern 69. That's perfect. Thank you. Can you please provide the hearing officer with a general background regarding North Kern Water Storage District?
Yeah. As detailed in the background and other sections of my written testimony, and also shown here on the map in the shaded green area, North Kern is located in the region north of the Kern River. The district is a water storage district that's organized and authorized to manage mostly Kern River water supplies for the irrigation and groundwater replenishment of the lands within the district. The primary water supply for the district is the Kern River supplies, originating from the water rights listed in the North Kern 1952 agreement for use of water rights.
Now, in order to provide Kern River water to lands within the district for irrigation and groundwater replenishment, what facilities does the district use to accomplish that purpose?
Yeah, well, the district is about 60,000 acres. About 47,000 acres of that is planted almost exclusively to irrigated agriculture. As explained in my written testimony, the district manages a variety of water facilities, but some of the principal facilities are first, the two canal systems, the historic Beardsley and Callaway Canal. They were, since 1870s. Second is the district's agreement for storage in Isabella Reservoir. Third would be the groundwater spreading facilities within the district. Fourth would be the district's system of deep wells. And fifth and final would be the distribution laterals throughout the district.
Now, all of those facilities are detailed further in your written testimony, North Kern 67. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. How does the district go about operating its facilities to deliver irrigation water to the lands within the boundaries of North Kern?
Yeah, so I provided a detailed summary in my detailed summary of the district's overall operations in the written testimony, but there are a couple key points to keep in mind. First,
yeah, go ahead. What key points? What are those?
Yeah. First, the district's Kern River supply is highly variable. It ranges from 10,000 acre feet in a dry year to 400,000 acre feet in a wet year. So second, because of this variability and insufficiency, it's necessary for the district to conjunctively manage both its Kern River water supplies on the surface and the local groundwaters to meet the irrigation water requirements of the farmland within the district.
That's helpful. Thank you. And how has the district organized its irrigation water service?
Yeah, the district's organized into two service areas. Class 1 service area is a surface water service area, servicing both surface water supplies and stored district well water. The other one is Class 2, and that's a groundwater service area. And together, both they provide the irrigation water for all the agriculture in the district.
Okay. And what would you say is, in summary fashion, are the primary elements of the district's water management program?
Yeah. Along with my testimony, I included 4 figures that provide a record of the district's operations related to Kern River diversions, total irrigation deliveries, the groundwater spreading practices, and the deep well operations.
I'm going to have Ms. Mullins, if you can pull up can you pull up maybe 4 exhibits sort of in a row, and then we'll just go through them quickly. It would be 76, 77, 78, and the last one would be 81. And we'll be, I think, quick with these. Very good. So up on the screen, Mr. Hampton, is North Kern 76, and it's entitled District Diversions from Kern River Water. So that was one of those operational features you were talking about. Of this shows the record for this period, 54 to 2020, diversions from the river to the district. Is that right?
That's correct.
So this is just an overall history for this period of years. Is that fair?
Yes. Yeah, that's fair.
If we could go to the next exhibit, Ms. Mullins, 77. And Mr. Hampton, this one is entitled District Deliveries to Irrigation. So is this with regard to lands irrigated in the district, I presume? Is that right?
That's correct.
And so it's deliveries to irrigation, which is both direct deliveries from Kern River or also pumping of groundwater to satisfy the irrigation water requirements of lands in the district. Is that right?
Yeah, it's both.
And again, this is the record of history from 54 to 20, and it shows it in acre feet. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, if we could go to the next exhibit, please. Thank you, Ms. Mullins. So this exhibit is titled District Deliveries to Spreading Ponds. And for the benefit of the hearing officer, what is a spreading pond?
It's a groundwater recharge facility. So you put water intentionally in the spreading pond to percolate to the groundwater.
To percolate the groundwater within the district to replenish that groundwater?
That's correct.
And so this exhibit shows the record of delivery of water to the spreading facilities to improve groundwater conditions within North Kern from 1954 to 2020. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And then, Ms. Mullins, let's go to the last exhibit, 81, please. Thank you. So this one is entitled Groundwater Pumping from District-Owned Deep Wells. And it's, again, the same period, 1954 through 2020. Is this a record of when the district had to turn on its groundwater wells to provide sufficient water for irrigation within the lands of the district, the Class 1 service area?
Yes.
So some years, wet years, it's not used. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But the last year of record 2020, which is a dry year, the district had to pump over 100,000 acre feet in order to meet irrigation water deliveries. Is that right?
That is correct.
So this is just one example, but that's what each one of those bars indicates, is how much groundwater had to be extracted from the basin within the district in order to meet irrigation water deliveries. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Have you made a review of district records to learn how Kern River water that was released from the Kern River as a result of the court's decision of forfeiture of Kern Delta water rights has been used by North Kern?
Yeah, in my written testimony, I explained that the district records reflect how the district manages and uses that Kern River water.
And what did you conclude from your review of the district's records?
I did provide the detail in my written testimony, but there are a couple principal points I can cover. First, all the water made available to North Kern as a result of the court's forfeiture decision had been used by the district to meet the irrigation water the water requirements for agriculture in the district. This water made available to the district as a result of the court's forfeiture judgment was managed in the same way the district manages all its Kern River water supplies.
Let me come back to that a little bit. So I want to be clear. So any of this water that traces back to the forfeiture of water rights of Kern Delta has all been used for irrigation use within the district. Is that right?
Yes.
And all of that water has been administered by the district in the exact same way you administer any water supply of the district. Is that right?
That's correct. We don't treat it any differently.
It's not a separate block of water that you treat any differently than any other water. Is that right?
That's correct.
It's just Kern River water?
It is Kern River water.
Okay, okay. Can you please pull up, Ms. Mullins, North Kern 84? Mr. Hampton, I know in your written testimony, there was actually two exhibits like this, 83 and 84, but I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions with regard to this exhibit. What is the information shown on these bars? It goes from, why don't you explain to me the period of time and then what is shown on these bars?
Okay, so shown on these bars are the North Kern District River entitlements plus or minus the releases for each year. The light blue bars are pre-court decision, below older than 2007. The dark blue bars are 2007 and above, and so they're not in chronological order here on this particular figure. The information's been sorted from a dry to wet year based on the annual natural flow of the Kern River at First Point.
Okay, so just so we can make sure that the hearing officer understands, so the driest quartile for this period of 1954 through 2020 is on the left side, is that right? Those are the dry years?
Yes.
And we see in the dry years, the first one is a dark blue bar, so that's within the forfeiture period 2015. And then 1961 is a pre-forfeiture decision, 1961, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And then likewise, we can see that same mix in the second quartile, some years with since the judgment and some before, right?
Yes.
And then in the third quartile, there were no years since the judgment that was in that third quartile, right?
Yes.
But then the wetter quartile, there's a mix of 4 years that are since the judgment, and most of the years have been prior to the judgment. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Now, based on your review of district records, as is shown in Exhibit 84, both before and after the court's decision went into effect, were you able to determine what effect the decision has had on North Kern's overall Kern River water supply?
Yeah. So based on both the records in the Kern River annual hydrographic reports and the district's operations experience before and after 2007, as shown on this figure 16, the Kern River water made available to the district as a result of the court's decision serves only to maintain the district's Kern River historic water supplies. It does not result in an overall increase in Kern River water greater than the district's historical supply.
Okay. And we can see that I appreciate that. So let's look in the fourth quartile, a wet kind of period. We've got many years before the judgment where more water came to the district before the judgment than after the judgment, right?
Yes.
And we see the same kind of thing in the driest first quartile, where there are instances where before the judgment, more water was available to the district than shows up since the judgment became effective. Is that right?
That is correct.
Is the Kern River water supply available as a result of the forfeiture decision? Is that a new supply of Kern River water to the district that it's never had before? Is this something new?
No, it is not.
Thank you. I have no other questions. This concludes our direct examination of Mr. Hampton. And we are prepared to proceed to go forward with Ms. Williams, if that's the preference of the hearing officer.
Yes, please. I'm going to change my view so I can see Ms. Williams on the screen.
Right.
It'll be the same camera.
Same
Yeah,
camera.
if you'll pardon me, I'll just put Ms. Williams' name in Mr. Hampton's place. And I've got her right outside the room here.
Good afternoon, Ms. Williams. When you're ready, will you please go ahead and raise your right hand for me? Ms. Williams, do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you very much. Please go ahead, Mr. Kearney.
And try to keep your voice up. And if not, have Mr. Stroud, if we need to make an adjustment, we'll do that as well. Thank you, Ms. Williams, for being here this afternoon. Are you able to hear the hearing officer and me well enough? And is everything working as best we can tell from the Zoom world?
Yes.
Okay. Can you please state your full name and business address for the record?
Heather Williams. Address is 33380 Coelho Extended, Bakersfield, California, 9330.
I'm sorry, she's cutting in and out. It's really
I-
difficult to hear.
I agree. Mr. Stroud, I'm not sure what accounts for that, but can you help us there?
Sure. I hope it's not the connection. Let's see.
No, you sound better.
All right. Let's see if that fixed it.
Okay.
Is that better?
Yeah, it is better. That
Okay.
seems to. Can the court reporter hear Ms. Williams now?
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Sorry for that delay. So prior to this afternoon, did you review your written testimony, North Kern 85, and referenced exhibits?
Yes, I did.
And did you find any changes that you wish to make either to your written testimony or your exhibits?
There was one thing that I did find that I would like to clarify.
Okay, and what is that?
On paragraph 2, it states that I was with the Water Resources Department from 2002 or started in 2002, but my actual employment with the Water Resources Department was in 2004.
So on line 20, then that should be 2004, not 2002. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And does that change also the next line, or is that date correct?
No, on line 20, I started my employment with the city of Bakersfield in 2002 in a different department, but the Water Resources Department, I started in 2004.
Okay. So it's line 21 that needs to change to 2004. Okay, very good. Thank you for reading it carefully, and I apologize for the typo. In your written testimony, you provide a brief summary of your job and current responsibility at North Kern as the district's operations superintendent. What is your typical day responsibilities regarding Kern River operations and records, now that you're at North Kern?
On a typical day, I monitor and report Kern River daily flows to district staff. I track the district's Kern River entitlements and use, as well as distributed Kern River release water. I track the daily Kern River water storage balances in Lake Isabella. I monitor.
I'm sorry, but she's fading away at the end.
Yeah,
of-
yeah. I think it's probably this, wherever the mic is in the monitor. So you need to probably speak more directly. I think that may be it. I'm not certain.
I think it is too, and she's looking down.
I'll try to scoot closer. Sorry.
And keep your voice up if you can.
I will do my best. I apologize.
Thank you.
Can you tell me where I left off, please?
Well, you were talking about that, on your typical day, you monitor and report daily flows and district staff.
I track daily Kern River water storage balances in Lake Isabella.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You're gonna have to repeat that slower and louder.
I track the daily Kern River water storage balances in Lake Isabella. I monitor canal diversions and flows into the Beardsley and Callaway canals and other district facilities. I also coordinate the district's water orders each day by utilizing the retained records and reports prepared by the City of Bakersfield Water Resources Department regarding the Kern River daily, monthly, and annual operations of Lake Isabella and other Kern River operations.
Now, I think you mentioned earlier when you were reviewing your written testimony that you previously worked at the City of Bakersfield Water Resources Department, and that background is included in your written testimony?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and does that paragraph 2 of your written testimony in North Kern 85 provide a good summary of the various positions and responsibilities you held while working at the Water Resources Department as it relates to Kern River operations, record keeping, and reports, including daily and monthly Kern River flow and diversion records?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Now, in your written testimony, you detail that you provided an explanation and some exhibits that illustrated your review and comparison of examples of daily and monthly Kern River flow and diversion records from both before and after the court decision. So I'm not going to repeat that here today. You've given that testimony in your written and you've given your exhibits. Instead, can you just provide the hearing officer with that short summary of the key facts that you observed in making that review and comparison? That's really what I'm interested in.
Okay. The flow and diversion records form is substantially identical both before and after April 2007. The procedures followed by the City of Bakersfield hydrographic staff with regard to the amount of Kern River water recorded as entitlement of the Kern River diversion rights and the water released to the Kern River and distributed to the diversion rights is the same except for one change. The records show that all Kern River water reported as releases to river, whether before or after 2007, is distributed in order of right and priority to the diversion rights listed on the flow and diversion record until all the Kern River water is fully exhausted. The only change in procedure since the court's decision is that the monthly caps limiting the amount of Kern River water diverted and used by the Kern Island First, Buena Vista First, Stein, and Farmers now limits the total amount diverted and used by those rights. And finally, the records since April 2007 show that monthly caps have been consistently applied for these 4 rights.
Okay. Now, you had that understanding, in this most recent review, but was that also your experience when you worked for the city? You were previously you were a hydrographic supervisor at the City of Bakersfield, is that right?
Yes.
And now you're the superintendent at North Kern. If that's right, is that correct?
Yes.
And so this observation you've had, I mean, that's true in both jobs that you've had. It's all the same except for the one change that you identified. Is that right?
Yes.
I have no further examination questions for Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Cuny. I think, well, let me ask Mr. Pierce how you want to go about doing this. do you want to cross-examine the witnesses one at a time? It sounds like, I mean, it looks like they're sharing a camera and a view. So it's up to you what order you would like to go in, but I'm going to hand things over for your cross-examination first, or by Ms. Ainsley, however you divvy things up. But I wanted to ask which witness you would like on camera.
I'd like to do Mr. Hampton first, please.
Okay, then let's take a moment and switch around.
I think they're all close.
Great.
You can't testify, Mr. Stroud. You'll have to get out of the chair.
Ah, darn.
All right, you may proceed when you're ready, Mr. Pierce.
Thank you, Ms. Kunze. And again, for the record, my name is Colin Pierce. I'm the attorney of record for the city of Bakersfield and section. Mr. Hampton, good afternoon. I don't know if we've met in person. I know we've been on Zoom calls together over the recent year or so. So good to see you.
Yeah.
Mr. Hampton, how long have you been general manager at North Kern again?
Since April of this year.
And before that, you were with the Coelho Water District?
Yes.
And you indicated that you had some experience with Kern River water before you came to North Kern. Was that based on your work for the Buena Vista Water Storage District?
Yeah, and also some work at Coelho Water District, so both.
Does the Coelho Water District divert it water from the Kern River?
Well, Coelho has a contract with the city of Bakersfield to purchase Kern River water.
They don't have their own separate water rights under which they divert water from the Kern River?
No, they do not.
Are you aware that North Kern submitted an application to appropriate water forfeited by the Kern Delta Water District?
Yes.
And do you know why North Kern submitted that application?
Yes.
Why is that?
Well, is the high-level reason it was backup in case the water that is subject to the judgment is deemed unappropriated.
I'm sorry, you said a backup, is that what you said?
Well, it's a process. If so, we don't believe the water is unappropriated, but if for some reason it is deemed unappropriated, we want to make sure that we have an application in to appropriate the water.
Do you know how much water or what quantity of water North Kern requested in its application?
I'd have to refer back to the application.
Are you aware that North Kern filed an application seeking rights to 500,000 acre feet of water?
Are you asking if that's in the same application?
Correct.
Yeah, I'm not aware if that's the correct volume.
And this is before, to be fair, this was well before you began to work for the North Kern Water Storage District, correct?
Yes.
What is the, can you tell me just offhand on average, how much water per year does North Kern divert from the Kern River?
On average?
Yes.
And you're talking about, are you asking for total supplies?
Let's stick with Kern River water.
But I mean, are you asking for, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to clarify. Are you asking for the release water or all Kern River diversion plus and minus the release water?
Well, do you keep track of those categories separately?
No, I'm not trying to understand your question.
Okay. Why don't you first start with the total amount of Kern River water per year on average North Kern diverts?
Yeah, it varies. It depends on what time of period you're looking at, but it's roughly about 100,000 acre feet.
Okay. And how much release water per year on average does North Kern divert?
If I recall correctly, it's on the order of about 40,000 acre feet.
Sorry, 14 or 40?
40.
40. And what is the current demand for water within North Kern per year?
Objection, vague and ambiguous as demand. Are you talking about irrigation demand? What are you talking about?
Mr. Hampton, how would you define, if I asked, how would you define the demand? Or maybe you can explain what demands you have.
We have irrigation demands, and that's roughly about 160 acre feet per year.
And by irrigation demand, that's the amount of water that needs to be applied to crops within North Kern each year.
No, that's the water consumption of crops.
What's the difference? What else is water used for within North Kern?
Recharge irrigation, or I'm sorry, groundwater recharge, groundwater spreading.
What's the demand for the consumptive use of water within North Kern for agricultural purposes per year? Direct agricultural deliveries or use?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure. What is the average annual demand currently within North Kern for direct consumptive use for agricultural purposes?
Yeah, that's approximately 160,000 acres.
Like I said, some of that went into storage right away. Is that right?
Well, no, so I was getting confused on some of your comments because you started talking about water consumption and applied water. And so there's a difference. The applied water is greater, but the crop consumption is 160,000 acre feet per year.
Okay. Got it. Thank you. Could we, Ms. Mullen, could you put North Kern 67 on the screen, which is the written testimony of David Hampton, and specifically, could we look at page 1, which I guess is actually, yeah, it's not the cover page, but the next page after. So technically it's page 2 of the document. And paragraph 2 there, I want to ask you a question about that, Mr. Hampton. In paragraph 2, you state that you relied on certain sources of information in preparing your written testimony, including records and materials, which, I'm paraphrasing, include the district's record of its daily, monthly, and annual diversion and use of Kern River water within the district. What records are those that you're referring to?
Well, North Kern has similar flow and diversion records as the city of Bakersfield. And so we have daily and monthly summaries and annual summaries.
North Kern prepares its own daily diversion sheets for Kern River Rights?
Well, that's part of the record. But yeah, we track and record and for our district purposes that information.
So you take the record, so you're familiar with the flow and diversion records prepared and maintained by the city of Bakersfield, correct?
Yeah, I'm familiar with them.
Does North Kern separately prepare records which are separate and independent from those records, or do they rely on the city's records to prepare its own records?
From what I understand, we rely on some of the information from those city records.
And how are the records prepared independent of the city's records?
Well, we have internal operations, and so that information is not part of the city's flow and diversion records.
Okay, so I guess aside from your internal records, which I assume show internal use within North Kern, does North Kern maintain its own records of diversion and use from the Kern River?
Yes.
Does North Kern measure flows or anything like that along the Kern River?
Not along the Kern River.
Along in canals that bring water into North Kern?
We measure the flow of water coming into the district and within the Beardsley and Callaway canals.
Does North Kern keep record of any other entity's use of water or just its own use of water?
Well, so we do have programs with other districts and other entities. And so as they relate to those other entities, we do track that information.
Okay. And on, let's go down to that same page to paragraph 3. Towards the bottom of page 1. You state in your testimony that the district relies on Kern River water diverted and used for irrigation and groundwater replenishment, according to certain water rights and facilities dating back to the 1870s. What rights are you referring to there?
Primarily the North Kern 1952 agreement for use of water rights.
And so your understanding that the rights mentioned in the 1952 agreement go back to the 1870s?
Well, yeah, I believe they do originate back that far.
Do you know if North Kern, and again, this, I'm not asking a legal question, I just want your understanding. Do you have any understanding as to whether North Kern diverted and used water according to those rights before 1952?
Well, North Kern didn't acquire its Kern River rights until the 1950s.
How do you know the rights that North Kern utilizes under the 1952 agreement go back to the 1870s?
Well, those 1952 agreement is based on all the previous
I'm sorry, it's based on all the,
agreements and court's decisions, starting with the Miller-Hagan agreements and the Shaw Decree.
So, you know, do you know if specifically, or how do you know specifically the rights mentioned and are listed in the 1952 agreement go back to the 1870s? That's my question. You referred to some general historic documents. I just want to know if you have any, or how you know the specific rights in the 1952 agreement go back to the 1870s.
Well, they're based on the historical information from the Shaw Decree and the Miller-Hagan agreement, and the Lux-Hagan prior to that.
Okay, I understand that. That makes sense. Do you have any understanding as to whether North Kern owns or holds any Kern River water rights other than its rights which are set forth in the 1952 agreement?
I am not aware of any other established Kern River rights other than the 1952 agreement. There are other contracts for water, but not
Okay.
deemed water rights.
And then on page 2 of your testimony, North Kern 67, which is actually the third page of the PDF, Ms. Mullen, line 3. Actually, if you could scroll down a tiny further, I'm sorry, Miss. It's in the very top of that page, Ms. Mullen. Actually, hold on. I'm sorry. Okay, so yes, paragraph 4. I'm sorry. I was. You indicated in paragraph 4 of your testimony that the district conjunctively manages its highly variable Kern River water supply. What do you mean by conjunctively managed?
Yeah, so to meet the irrigation demand within the district, oftentimes there's not enough Kern River water supply available to meet the demand with surface water. So we have to manage those supplies conjunctively with the available groundwater supplies within the district.
Can you be more specific about what do you mean when you say you conjunctively manage water
Yeah,
supply?
so when the surface water is insufficient to meet the demand, then we make up that difference by pumping the groundwater to deliver the irrigation water to meet that demand.
You're referring to the practice of spreading water in wetter years and pumping it out in drier years. Is that correct?
Yes.
Generally?
Yes, generally.
You know, you indicated earlier that on average, North Kern diverts approximately 40,000 acre feet of, well, I believe you just called it release water, which I would assume would include water created by the by the forfeiture decision in 2007. But of this 40,000 acre feet of release water on average diverted by North Kern, what percentage is applied for direct irrigation versus what percentage is recharged and spread for later use?
All of it is used to apply for surface water.
I'm sorry. I didn't hear that answer. I don't know
Yeah.
why we were having difficulty hearing you.
I'll be
Lean
I'll be
forward and
louder.
Speak up. Thank you. All of it.
All of it is used for irrigation.
Yeah,
Thank
but how
you.
much of what percentage of the release water is applied directly for irrigation upon or immediately following diversion as compared to amounts which are spread and recharged for later direct irrigation delivery?
From what I understand, the water from the court's forfeiture judgment decision is all used for direct irrigation.
You don't spread or recharge any of the release water?
I would have to go back and double check my records, but I do not believe there is any.
The North Kern spreads quite a bit of water, correct? Each year or on wet years, is that right?
Yes.
You're saying you separately segregate out release water not to be spread, is that right?
Yeah, and so can I clarify?
Sure.
So when I referenced release water, I was referring to the water made available from the court's forfeiture decision.
Okay.
And so those are only available in the 6 months.
And you're saying that water you don't spread or recharge?
No, it's applied directly.
Okay. But all the other water which you divert separate from that supply, you do spread and recharge, correct? Well, on occasion, obviously, some of it you do also apply for recharge. I mean, for direct irrigation deliveries.
Yeah, when we have sufficient supplies, yes, we do recharge the water. We do spread the water for the groundwater recharge.
Okay. And I don't know if you said this in your testimony before, but on average, and granted, this is an average, and some years I assume you recharge no water, such as in dry years, but on average, overall, total district Kern River water supplies, on average, how much water per year does North Kern recharge or spread for later use?
I would have to refer to my documents and look that information up.
Do you have a sense of what percentage of water you spread and recharge?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to say to be too far off base.
Yeah. On page 3 of your testimony on North Kern 67, Ms. Mullen, could you switch to the next page, which is, I believe, the 4th page of the PDF? You refer in paragraph 9 there to a 1964 state board or state water rights board proceeding. Do you see that?
Yeah, Mr. Pierce, I'm having difficulty hearing you.
Okay. On page 3 of your testimony in paragraph 9, you refer to a 1964 state water rights board proceeding. Do you see that?
Yes.
And were you born in 1964 or before? At 1964, were you alive?
I was not.
Okay. Why did he think it was important to refer to the 1964 proceeding, which I assume you didn't take part in? I guess obviously you didn't take part in.
No. Yes, you are correct. I did not take part of that proceeding. Thought it was important to show the record of the historical record of the Kern River and its fully appropriated stream status or stream system.
And do you know if the Kern River is still deemed fully appropriated by the state of California?
Well, from what I understand, there's been a revision, and we're in the process of determining that.
Can you, I'm sorry, I think I kind of heard that, but I'm not sure if the court reporter caught everything. I would just ask you, and I'm guilty of the same thing apparently, but I would just ask you to speak up a little bit more.
Okay, yeah, I
I'm having
apologize.
trouble hearing some of your answers myself.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Do you need to say something else?
Oh, I thought you were gonna repeat your question.
No, I think I heard enough of it. I just,
Okay.
yeah. Also on page 3 of your testimony, that same page, in paragraph 12, Ms. Mullen, if you could scroll down a little bit more. In that paragraph 12, you indicate that approximately 94% of the farmland acreage is developed to permanent crops, with nuts and vineyards as an example, with the remaining 6% dedicated to annual crops. Permanent crops use more water overall than annual crops, correct?
No, that's not necessarily true.
Has the percentage, and do you know if the percentage of permanent crops within North Kern has increased in recent years?
Well, it depends on what period of time you want to reference, but in general, over the last many years, the percentage of permanent crops have increased in the district.
What percentage of North Kern is covered by irrigated agriculture?
Yeah, I would have to refer to the records to make sure I answer that correctly.
I assume it's a large percentage of the of the district's land, or the land within the district is covered by crops that are irrigated, correct?
Yeah, if you let me, I can do the calculation dividing 47,000 by 60,000.
I'm sorry, 47,000 by
60,000.
Okay, so actually that's another way to, you answer my question in a better way. North Kern is approximately 60,000 acres, is that correct?
Yes.
And 47,000 acres of that territory currently is irrigated or covered by irrigated crops, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And do you know if that amount of irrigated land has increased in recent years, let's say in the last 10 years or 20 years?
My recollection actually is that amount of land of the irrigated acres has it's fluctuated because of the drought conditions based on hydrology, but I think we're in a lower average, so it's decreased a little bit over the last few years.
Okay. Do you know if North Kern's demands for water have increased over the last 10 years or so?
They remain fairly consistent.
Okay. In that same paragraph, we've been looking at paragraph 12, you refer to some additional lands, which you identify as the Rosedale Ranch Improvement District. What is the Rosedale Ranch Improvement District?
It's an improvement district that was included in the 1960s. They do not receive, they're outside of what we refer to as the North Kern Old District boundaries. So they're outside of the project area for the 1952 agreement for use of water rights. So they do not have any water supplies, and they're purely get their irrigation water from pumping from groundwater supplies that are not North Kern water supplies.
So Rosedale
I'm
Ranch.
sorry, from pumping groundwater supplies. You're really trailing off at the end.
Yeah,
I don't know what's
apologize.
different, but
I'll blame the mic here.
okay, so they're irrigation water from pumping groundwater supplies, and then what did you say?
That are not North Kern, are not, what I did say was they were not North Kern water supplies, but they're not the North Kern 1952 river water supplies.
So I hope this doesn't enter into a legal issue, but is the Rosedale Ranch Improvement District currently within the legal boundaries of North Kern, the current legal boundaries?
It's within the current legal boundaries.
Okay.
But for the purposes of this AHO hearing and this process, when I refer to the district boundaries, I'm referring to the boundaries that were established in 1952.
And we'll get to the 1952 agreement, but isn't it true that the 1952 agreement has a place of use limitation that limits water diverted by North Kern to only use within the boundaries of North Kern as of 1952? Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay, and so when you refer to the Rosedale Ranch Improvement District being outside the 1952 boundaries, that's important because under the agreement, the water that North Kern diverts under the 1952 agreement can't be used within the Rosedale Ranch Improvement District, correct?
that's correct.
And in fact, you're testifying that North Kern does not use water diverted under the 1952 agreement within the 9,500 acre Rosedale Ranch Improvement District.
Yes.
How do you make sure that the water isn't used within the Rosedale Ranch? Is there a separate distribution system and the canals don't bring the water into Rosedale Ranch?
Well, so the Rosedale Ranch Improvement District rarely gets surface water deliveries. And the only time that occurs is when the district acquires supplemental or other surface water that comes into the district. And oftentimes that can be off of the state water project, off of the Friant system. And so those are very clear and obvious different diversion areas.
Thank you, Mr. Hampton.
Yes.
So Ms. Mullen, could you switch to the next page of North Kern 67? So let's look at paragraph 13 here. You reference a map, of course, but in paragraph 13 of North Kern 67, you refer to the Beardsley and Callaway canals. Are those the primary canals that bring water from the Kern River into North Kern?
Yes.
But then in the next paragraph, you say the district's principal conveyance facility and the most upstream diversion is the Beardsley-Lerdo Canal system. And that has a capacity of 850 CFS, is that correct?
That's correct.
And the diversion point for the, I know there's a map, but just generally just a general question, the Beardsley-Lerdo Canal system, that is a diversion point upstream from the city of Bakersfield, is that correct?
It's in the northern upstream part of Bakersfield. I believe it's still within Bakersfield city limits.
Those could, it does, and so I want to, if I refer to canal, North Kern's canals, I'm going to be referring to the Beardsley-Lerdo Canal system and then the Callaway canals. Are there other canals that bring water into North Kern?
Another canal that can bring water into North Kern is the Friant Kern Canal.
Okay, that's not from the Kern River though, correct?
Well, there is an intertie at the Kern River, so it is possible to put Kern River water into the Friant Kern.
That doesn't happen very often though, does it?
No, it does not.
Okay, so when I say canals, let's exclude the Friant Canal, and I'll be referring to the Beardsley and Callaway canals. Do those canals, the Beardsley and Lerdo Canal, do they divert water year-round into North Kern from the Kern River?
When there's available water supply. And for clarification, the Beardsley Canal, it's the same canal. It becomes the Lerdo Canal when it crosses into the district.
Okay, I'm mixed. Yeah, I know I'm
It's
mixing
just-
things
I'm
up.
sorry, hang on. The Beardsley Canal, it's the same canal as from the Lerdo Canal, and then what did you say?
So for clarification, the reference here to the Beardsley-Lerdo Canal system is the Beardsley Canal. It's just labeled the Beardsley Canal up to 7 Standard Road, where the canal comes into the district, and then it becomes the Lerdo Canal.
Okay. So the primary canals are the Beardsley Beardsley Canal, which becomes the Beardsley-Lerdo Canal, and then the Callaway Canal, which is a separate canal, correct?
The Callaway is a separate canal.
Okay. And some of the water, of course, which is diverted by North Kern through those canals out of the Kern River north into North Kern is spread or banked for later use, correct?
Yes.
And you testified earlier about the groundwater basin, which underlies North Kern. What groundwater basin is that?
Per WDR Bulletin 118, it's I believe it is designated 5.22-14, the Kern County Subbasin.
And the Kern County Subbasin encompasses the city of Bakersfield also, is that correct?
Yes,
And most parts of the Kern River within the San Joaquin Valley portion of Kern County?
I believe so.
So we're talking, it's the same basin, right? The same basin underlies North Kern and the primary part of the Kern River below the Kern River Canyon, correct?
Yes.
Why doesn't North Kern spread water in the Kern River channel instead of spreading and banking the water in North Kern?
Well, for starters, the 1952 agreement doesn't allow us to do that.
Because of the place of use restriction?
Correct.
Other than that, could a North Kern spread water in the Kern River channel and then pump it out later since it's all in the same basin?
Theoretically, the district could potentially do that, but in order to extract that water, we would need extraction facilities.
You need to have pumps in the vicinity of the Kern River.
Mm-hmm.
Have you approached the city of Bakersfield about installing wells to pump water along the Kern River?
Objection, Your Honor. Hearing Officer Kunze, I think we're very far afield from the issue to be determined and certainly beyond the scope and off onto matters that are undue, consumptive, and just not relevant to the issue. We're not talking about facilities and management programs for some future program that has yet to be articulated. It's just not germane.
Let me hear from you, Mr. Pierce, where you are going with this, please.
Well, I think, Your Honor, Ms. Kunze, number one, he has testimony about the canal system. He has testimony about spreading, and we are here because of the Kern River. So all three of those things are highly relevant to these proceedings. So I believe I should be entitled to ask him about canals and the Kern River and water spreading. And I know that maybe that, I'm not going to ask about future projects, but I just want to get an understanding of, like I said before, like when I was asking questions of Mr. Ride, if North Kern's going to prove or try to establish they have a valid right to divert the forfeiture release water, they need to show not just that they have a right, but they have to show reasonable beneficial use. And I'm trying to establish what they're doing with the water that they claim a right to.
So are you withdrawing your question? Now I don't call the most recent question, but are you going to move away from this line of questioning regarding the hypothetical spreading through the Kern River channel and wells associated with that?
I'm going to move away from future hypothetical projects, but I do have some more questions about North Kern's diversions and canals in the Kern River.
That's fine. Let's go
Okay.
ahead and proceed that way. Thank you.
Okay. And I don't know if I got an answer to the question though after I got the objection.
Well, let's hear the question again because I don't remember the question.
Well, I'll withdraw the question. It's not critical. Does North Kern monitor the flow of the river after it diverts water from the river, like downstream from its diversion points?
Yes.
For what purpose?
Well, to monitor and manage the Kern River flows, and it goes to our district operations and understanding the volume of water that's coming into the district.
I'm talking about obviously there's flows in the river and North Kern then diverts water from the river into its canals. I'm asking if North Kern monitors flows of water in the river below the diversion points. Let's say below the last diversion point for North Kern along the river.
Oh, I'm sorry. So you mean in the river channel?
Correct, yes. Sorry if my question wasn't clear.
Not that I'm aware of, other than we do monitor activity at second point of measurement.
And that's all the way downstream, well past the city of Bakersfield city limits.
Yes.
Does North Kern try to maintain minimum flows in the Kern River below its last diversion point?
No.
I'm sorry, did you give an answer?
No, it does not.
Okay. And you're aware that some rivers in the state of California, such as the Russian River, do have minimum flow requirements. Is that right?
Objection. Now we're on the Russian River. Can we really focus on the issue of whether or not the city can show unappropriated water in this matter?
I'm thinking about whether this, I mean, the one thing that I think is real, I think I'm going to allow it, and here's why, which is one, I'm interested in the answer, although this probably will come up again in later phases of the proceeding. But I think to some extent, this does go to the scope of it's not North Kern. I'm going to call them North Kern's water rights. I realize the exact nature of those is in dispute with that caveat. So I'm going to allow this question, but let's move along quickly, Mr. Pierce. We'll see where you're going, but I don't want to spend too much time because I think it is just tangentially related here.
I do have a few more questions, but I will move on from this subject after we get an answer to this question.
Okay.
Ms. Kunze.
Yes, can you repeat the question?
Ms. Reporter, can you read back the question, please?
You're aware that some rivers in the state of California, such as the Russian River, do have minimum flows, right?
Yes, I am aware that there are other rivers that have minimum flow requirements.
There's no, just to be clear, there's no minimum flow requirements currently in the Kern River, correct?
From what I understand.
I'm sorry, from what you understand, did you say no?
That's all I said, just from what I understand.
Okay.
I think you said what you said, from what I understand, no. That was your answer, Mr. Hampton?
I believe I just said from what I understand.
Is there a way that we can like pause quickly and see if we can get the microphone issue fixed there?
It apparently is not the microphone, it's Zoom.
Oh,
We got the microphone all the way up.
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me okay. This is Brett Stroud. We've got the microphone in here all the way up, and sitting in the room, I can tell you that Mr. Hampton's speaking about as loudly as Mr. Ide did. I think we might have a connection problem of some sort.
How about if you guys try exiting and coming right back?
Why don't we do this? Let's take a break. Let's just take a 5-minute break, and we'll give a chance. We'll leave the Zoom up. So if you need to do some testing amongst yourselves, maybe that's possible, but the rest of us can take a 5-minute break and then we'll return. I'm sorry, Mr. Pierce, to pause your cross in this way, but I think it might be helpful for all of us.
No, I understand. Yeah, this is a little challenging, so thank you.
So
Yeah, I think that 5 minutes, if we can get it fixed, will save us time instead of me interrupting all the time. So
thank you. And it's 2:57. We'll return at 3:02 and we'll test where we are at that time. Thank you.
I would exit Zoom and come back because certainly doesn't always work, but sometimes that refixes it. Maybe even reboot the computer.
I'll try that.
Okay, I'll see you in a bit.
Thank you.
Mr. Cooney or Mr. Stroud, do you think we had some success in
I hope so. I think so.
improving the sound? I know it's difficult from my own experience this morning.
So how does it sound now?
It sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds clear. I agree.
Thank you very much, you guys.
No, I apologize to you. I'm sorry. I know it's bad enough to have to court report, but this certainly doesn't help. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Thank you. And if we're ready, let's go ahead and go back on the record. I believe I will turn to you, Mr. Pierce, to consider your, I'm sorry, to continue your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kunze. And again, Colin Pierce for our City of Bakersfield. Mr. Hampton, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Has North Kern adopted any conservation measures in recent years, in your understanding? And granted, you haven't been there very long.
Can you be more specific? Are there specific plans you're talking about, or?
Oh, I'm not a general manager for a water district, so I'm
Yeah,
not sure
okay,
exactly
I
what
didn't
kind
know
of
if you had a-
conservation measures you would do, but I just want to know if in your knowledge, if you have any knowledge of any conservation measures, any measures to reduce, let's define conservation as a reduction in the use of water.
I am not aware of any.
Okay. Do you know if North Kern has ever implemented or adopted any projects intended to reduce diversions of water from the Kern River?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay. And I think I know the answer to this question, but in your knowledge, has North Kern ever adopted or implemented any measures to increase flows of water in the Kern River?
No.
Let's go back to North Kern 67, Ms. Mullen, and I'd like now to look at page 5, which again is, I think, the 6th page of the PDF. And specifically, I'd like to look at lines 7 through 11, which is right in front of us. And in this paragraph, or this section of the paragraph, you refer to some facilities under which North Kern has the capability to divert Kern River water. I'm trying to follow all these connections here, but you do talk about here.
Yeah, excuse me, your volume's getting low.
Okay, sorry. You talk about in this paragraph conveying water into the California Aqueduct. I guess let me just ask the question: does North Kern convey water into the California Aqueduct?
North Kern has a joint program with water districts on the west side of the valley floor. So when they bank their water in North Kern, we can extract it and move it to them and return it.
So you're talking about a program, which does this program you're describing, and which I assume that you're alluding to in your discussion of these facilities, does that project involve any Kern River water that North Kern diverts in connection with the 1952 agreement?
And no, it does not.
Okay. So you're talking here about a whole separate project that doesn't involve Kern River water. Is that right?
Correct.
And the city of Shafter is involved in this proceeding in connection, or I guess in partnership with North Kern, just a quick question about Shafter. Does Shafter divert any Kern River water?
No,
Currently.
not that I'm aware of.
Do you know if the city of Shafter has ever historically used any Kern River water?
Objection, Lex Foundation calls for speculation.
I'm going to allow the question. It's a do you know? So you may answer, Mr. Hampton, if you know.
I do not know.
All right. Could we turn to Ms. Mullins? Could you pull up North Kern 41? And Mr. Hampton, are you familiar with the 1952 agreement, North Kern 41?
I am familiar with it.
And you've read the agreement, I understand?
I have.
And you earlier indicated that this, the only Kern River water which North Kern receives or diverts is through this agreement, correct?
That was not my intent if I said that earlier. That is not the only Kern River water. And I thought I earlier said that we receive other Kern River water.
There's North Kern has a contract with the city of Bakersfield that dates back to 1976, correct?
Correct.
Okay. What other sources of Kern River water are there for North Kern?
No other ones that I am aware of.
Okay, so the 52 agreement, and then there's this 1976 agreement, but beyond that, there's no other source of Kern River water for North Kern, correct?
Not that I'm aware of.
So if we could turn Ms. Mullins to the second page of North Kern 41. Right there, yes, thank you. This first paragraph identifies certain water rights, which the agreement states are the subject of this agreement, which it refers to as a right to divert water from the Kern River pursuant to rights which are known and identified by the following names, priority dates, and quantities, correct?
Yes.
And you're familiar with the daily diversion sheet that that Mr. Ide discussed at length today?
I am familiar with it.
And then I don't mean to be, this isn't meant to be a test or anything, but is it your understanding that the diversion rights listed in this agreement are also listed in on the daily diversion sheet?
That is my understanding.
Then Ms. Mullen, if you could go to the fourth page of this document. So this is paragraph 2. This paragraph states that the district, which Mr. Hampton, that refers to North Kern, correct?
Yes.
The district will have the right in perpetuity, subject to the provisions of this agreement, to divert, transport to the district, and use so much of the water accruing to the water rights described above during each calendar month of each year, as shall enable the district to divert from the Kern River not more than the maximum quantity set forth for such month in the following tabulation. So I just read that first part of paragraph 2, and the water rights described above were the rights that we just looked at on page 2 of this agreement, correct?
Yes.
Okay, we can go back to that if you want, but those diversions rights don't include any rights which are currently owned by Kern Delta, correct?
From what I understand, the rights listed on the previous page do not include Kern Delta rights.
And you're familiar with Kern Delta's rights, correct?
At some level.
You know they divert under the Kern Island right, correct?
Yes, yes, I do know that.
And the Buena Vista right?
Yep.
Stein right?
Yes,
Farmers right?
yes.
Okay, East Side right?
I'd have to double check that.
Okay, yeah, that's what I'm never clear on the East Side right. Okay. Thank you. And then there's also these maximum limits here. And I asked Mr. Wright this question, but do you know if North Kern has, I guess, let's say in the past, let's say since 1976, do you know if North Kern has exceeded these maximum diversion amounts at any time, on any occasions?
I would have to go double check the records.
And I just want to understand that it's your position, it's North Kern's position, I should say, that the forfeiture releases are diverted by North Kern based on rights in the 1952 agreement. Is that correct?
Objection calls for legal conclusion, argumentative.
With the understanding that Mr. Hampton is not an attorney, I think I'd like to hear his response based on his own understanding.
Yes, so I apologize. Can you please repeat that question?
Sure. Is it your understanding that, well, let me back up. North Kern, it's not really in dispute that North Kern has diverted historically released water, correct? Before 2007, North Kern diverted water released by Kern Delta, correct?
Correct.
And since 2007, North Kern has diverted water that Kern Delta has now been required to release based on the 2007 Court of Appeal decision and prior decisions in that litigation, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Under what right or under what authority does North Kern divert the forfeiture release water? Let's start
I'll
with that.
restate my objection. Now we're asking him a legal opinion. What right is it? What legal right is it?
Mr. Pierce, will you please rephrase the question? So we're asking for Mr. Hampton's understanding. I understand, Mr. Cooney, you may still have an objection to that, but I'm going to overrule it to that extent.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Kunze. That's a good clarification. Mr. Hampton, what is your understanding of the justification or right under which North Kern diverts forfeiture release water from the Kern River?
Based on this 1952 agreement and the Shaw Decree.
What part of this 1952 agreement?
For the rights listed in the previous page.
Those don't list the Kern Delta rights, correct?
I believe they do not.
Okay. Doesn't the release water accrue to Kern Delta rights? Not the rights
Objection
listed?
calls for a legal conclusion argument. That's a proposition of law that he's advocating. That's certainly beyond the scope of this non-legal witness as a manager. It's just purely argumentative and a waste of our time.
I think that's fair, Mr. Pierce. I'm going to sustain the objection. I think I understand where you're going on this. I'm trying to think if there's a way to rephrase the question that is not calling for a legal conclusion. Frankly, I can't think of one, but if you'd like to give it another shot, you may.
I'll give it a try, perhaps. Well, yeah, I don't know if he's not able to testify, that's fine. Let me just ask it this way, Mr. Hampton. Do you have an understanding? Do you personally have an understanding that North Kern claims a right to divert the forfeiture release water?
Objection. That mischaracterizes testimony. Also, what they have a right to is to divert water. That's, a characterization and argument again of Mr. Pierce's theory for the city that there is a block of water called release water that is something from out of his head that is what is being exercised. It's argumentative, it's legal conclusions. Let him put it in a brief.
I understand your objection, Mr. Cooney. I think in this case, the question did to ask for Mr. Hampton's understanding. I think it's fair for the city of Bakersfield to investigate Mr. Hampton's understanding of North Kern's, excuse me, diversions, given his position. So I'm going to allow the question with, once again, the caveat that he's testifying based on his own understanding, which is not as a legal expert or providing legal opinion. Mr.
Yeah.
Hampton, if you remember the question, you may go ahead and answer it.
Yeah, I apologize. Could I ask to have it read back?
Do you have an understanding? Do you personally have an understanding that North Kern claims a right to divert the forfeiture release water?
My understanding is North Kern has the entitlement right to divert Kern River water, which that release water is returned back.
I'm sorry. My understanding is that North Kern has the what right?
The entitlement right,
Okay, thank you.
and that release water is part of the Kern River water that is used to appropriate a portion to that entitlement right.
What do you mean by entitlement right?
So as listed, the rights listed on the previous page, there's diversion rights, I believe it is, if you can go back a page.
Ms. Mullen, yeah, let's go back to the list of the rights, which I believe are
Oh,
actually 2 pages back.
2 pages,
Mr. Hampton, 2 pages.
yes.
Okay.
So the diversion rights listed here is what I was referring to.
Okay. So it's your understanding that North Kern claims a right to divert forfeiture release water based on the rights listed here. Is that right?
Objection is mischaracterizing his testimony. He said divert Kern River water under these diversion rights.
Is that, and I'm sorry, Mr. Pierce, is that not what you said? What was your, we can ask the court reporter to read it back, or you can try your question again. I thought that was the question you asked.
I just want to confirm that he's referring to these rights when I asked him under what authority or under what theory North Kern diverts the forfeited water. I want to make sure these are the rights he's referring to. Are these the rights, Mr. Hampton?
These are the rights. I'm referring to these rights as the right to divert Kern River water, which includes any release water.
Are you aware that North Kern alleged in the forfeiture litigation that it had a right to divert release water released by Kern Delta under the 1952 agreement?
I'm not aware of this specific language and description. No, I'm not aware.
You're aware there was there was litigation that led up to the 2007 Court of Appeal decision, correct?
Yes.
Are you aware that North Kern made a claim for that water in the litigation?
I would have to refer back to that.
Well, let's call up then, Ms. Mullen, let's call up Bakersfield 27, page 26. And actually, I'm just maybe to orient the witness, Ms. Mohan, can you go back to the very first page of this document? All right, and I'm going to represent to you, well, actually, let me start with this. Have you ever seen this document before, Mr. Hampton?
Yes, I have.
And what is this document?
Complaint for determination of water rights, declaratory, injunction, relief, and damages.
I'm sorry, you trailed off there, Mr. Hampton.
I'm just reading the title, the second amended complaint for determination of water rights, declaratory relief, injunction relief, and damages.
Is it your understanding this was a complaint, the most recent complaint filed by North Kern in the forfeiture litigation that led to the 2007 decision?
I am not sure.
Then Ms. Mullen, can we now jump to page 26 of this, of Bakersfield 27? And yeah, perfect. On this page of Bakersfield 27, there's a cause of action for purchase alleged by North Kern. And Ms. Mullen, can you scroll down a little bit more?
Hearing Officer Kunze, this relates to something in 1996 when he was not in any way involved in the district at all. He's not a lawyer. And what we're going to do, we're going to examine a lay witness that wasn't even employed by the district with regard to a complaint that he wasn't involved in 15 years ago. It's a waste of our time. It says what it says. Let him argue it.
I think that's a fair objection, Mr. Pierce, although I'd like to hear what your response is. What is the purpose of examining Mr. Hampton about this document?
Well, first of all, one of the issues you've identified that we need to address here is whether North Kern has a valid right to divert the forfeiture release water, which they have identified as a separate supply of water. And I believe I'm entitled to ask questions of the three witnesses they produce to see if they have any knowledge, any facts, any information to support this claim to water rights. I mean, I agree that Mr. Hampton was not general manager at this time, and I agree he's not a lawyer, but I mean, the purpose of this hearing is to present evidence. And if North Kern has no evidence of a water right, or if their only evidence of a water right is the 1952 agreement, I believe I'm entitled to ask about documents that undercut that and challenge that argument. And I mean, again, I mean, this is already in evidence. If he doesn't know anything about it, he can say he doesn't know anything about it, but he's already identified, he already said he knows this document. He's seen this document before. So I don't see why I can't ask him about it. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. I want to identify, we could have been done if Mr. Cooney hadn't interposed his objection. I was going to ask him about a portion of this and then move on.
All right, well, let's not spend a lot of time because I don't think this at this point, the cross-examination is not particularly helpful to me. I can read the document and I can understand it. So go ahead and ask your question, Mr. Pierce, but let's move along if we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hampton, I just want to refer you to paragraph 57. I just want to know if I want to ask you if you're aware that are you aware that North Kern alleged in this under a cause of action for purchase that as part of the 1952 agreement, North Kern purchased the right to divert water which was historically released and not diverted and reasonably beneficially used by Kern Delta. And I'm looking at lines 26 and 27. Were you aware of that allegation?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Were you aware, final question, were you aware that the trial court denied and rejected this claim?
No, I'm not aware.
Okay, thank you. I'll move on. I want to get back, Mr. Hampton, and I'm almost done here. I just want to follow up on a couple of questions here. I want to get back to the forfeiture release water. And I want to be clear, when I say forfeiture release water, I'm referring to the definition that your expert consultant, Mr. Ide, referred to. Are you familiar with that term, forfeiture releases?
As your discussion earlier today, yes.
Okay, you heard you were present or you listened to Mr. Ide's testimony, correct?
I did.
Okay, and you heard him give a definition and refer to a definition of that term in his report, correct?
I did hear it, yes.
Okay. So when we're talking about forfeiture releases, just to be clear, we're talking about water released by Kern Delta above the forfeiture cap since 2007, correct?
That's my understanding of it.
Okay. And earlier in your cross-examination, you said that North Kern has diverted an average of about 40,000 acre feet of water, or about 40,000 acre feet of that forfeiture release water, correct?
Yeah, that was an estimate.
Okay, sure. I'm not going to hold you to an exact number.
Yeah, that was an estimate.
And you're familiar with the forfeiture caps, correct? You know, when, you know, generally, and again, I'm not going to test you on them, but you're generally aware when they're in place and under what rights. Is that right?
Generally, yes.
Are they generally, the caps generally in place in the winter months?
January, December. I'm going backwards. And then, so I believe it starts in August.
Okay.
At the very least, I'd have to look at the chart, but at least November, October, November, December, and January.
Okay.
6 months.
And I believe you said that you testified that North Kern only applies the forfeiture release water it diverts for direct irrigation deliveries. Was that correct? Or did I hear that right?
So I want to offer clarification on direct. So I wasn't implying that all the water, I didn't mean to imply that all the water gets delivered directly to the crops.
Okay, what? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
So there's seepage losses, and there are times that the demand is there's a lack of crop demand, and so yeah, in retrospect, all the water gets used for irrigation. It's not always directly applied.
And there's less, isn't it true that in general, there's less direct irrigation demand in the winter months, right?
Yes.
And that's when the forfeiture release water is more available in the winter months, correct?
This particular release water.
The forfeiture release water as opposed to other sources of water, correct, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
If North Kern doesn't apply the forfeiture release water, it diverts for direct irrigation deliveries. What else does it do with the water in the interim period before it applies it to direct irrigation deliveries?
It would be recharged, and so I think that was my confusion earlier.
Do you have a sense as to what percentage of the forfeiture release water, this 40,000 acre foot average amount, what percentage of that since 2007 has been spread or banked for later use as opposed to used for direct irrigation deliveries?
I don't know.
Is some of the forfeiture release water, is that placed in storage in Lake Isabella?
I don't know.
North Kern does have storage rights in Lake Isabella, correct?
Correct.
And North Kern holds water in storage in Lake Isabella for later use if it doesn't have a direct demand for that water, correct?
Yes, North Kern can.
But you don't know if any of the forfeiture release water has been ever put in storage?
Yeah, I would have to go check the records.
So when North Kern diverts forfeiture release water, it may go into storage. You're not sure. It may be spread. You don't know how much and what amount, or it could be applied for direct irrigation delivery. Is that right?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure. I'm just trying to understand what happens to the forfeiture release water. You testified that it may go into storage, but you're not sure. Some portion of the forfeiture release water may go into storage, right? But you don't know for sure.
I am not sure.
Okay. You do know that some of it is spread and banked for later within the district for later use, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then some other unknown amount is applied for direct irrigation deliveries, right?
Yes.
So out of 3 possible outcomes, only one of them involves direct irrigation deliveries, right?
No, I don't think that's accurate. Because if you know, as the case with any river water, if it's stored in Isabella, then when that's brought down from storage, it gets directly applied to irrigation, or can be directly applied to irrigation.
Well, if it's stored in Isabella, it's not directly applied to irrigation while it's in Lake Isabella, right?
Well, it's in conservation storage.
That's what you call storage in Lake Isabella, conservation storage?
Yeah, while it's stored in Isabella.
Okay, so it's either stored in Lake Isabella for later use or it's stored in the ground for later use, right?
Yes.
Okay, if you will allow me 1 second, I may be done, but let me just double check my notes. Mr. Hampton, that's all I have. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Pierce, do you have questions for Ms. Williams?
I do. Although I don't know. Oh, yeah, I guess I'll do my questions and then we'll make both
Yes.
witnesses available. Okay. That's not Mrs. Williams.
No, it is not, but it will be momentarily.
Yeah, I'm joking. I know Brett well.
And Ms. Williams, I just know that you've been witnessing our audio challenges, but if you would please, to the extent you can,
I'm going to
try
do
to remember
my
to speak as loudly and clearly as possible.
I will
so we can
do
work
my
through it.
very best.
Thank you. Mr. Pierce, when you're ready, you may proceed.
Thank you, Ms. Coonsey. And again, for the record, Colin Pierce for City of Bakersfield. Ms. Williams, good afternoon. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you as well.
You don't have to say the same thing. I get it. Ms. Williams, your testimony in this case has been marked as North Kern 85. Did the attorneys for North Kern help you prepare this testimony?
It was a joint effort between myself and staff.
Between yourself and
Staff.
And what specific assignment or what issue were you asked to address in your testimony?
To find 2 comparable years before and after the judgment and compare how the releases were administered.
compare how the what were administered?
Releases,
Thank you.
When you say releases, what are you referring to?
the caps, the Kern Delta caps.
Sorry, I'm realizing I'm in the shadow quite a bit. I'm trying to get more oriented. I'm sorry, you said the forfeiture releases?
Yes,
Okay, and you heard Mr. Wright's testimony, or are you familiar with the term forfeiture releases?
I'm familiar with it.
Okay. And would it be fair to say that you understand that means the water that is released by Kern Delta above the forfeiture caps imposed as a result of the 2007 Court of Appeal decision and prior actions and decisions in that proceeding?
Yes,
Are you familiar with the 1952 agreement between North Kern and the city of Bakersfield's predecessors?
to a point.
What point? What do you understand about that, or what do you know about that agreement?
I don't read it often.
I'm sorry, you trailed off. You don't read it?
I don't
often?
read it often.
Okay, but you have read it before, correct?
Yes, it's been some time, but yes.
But again, you're not here to give any testimony about water rights or what rights North Kern may or may not hold, correct?
No,
And you're not an attorney, correct?
I'm not an attorney, no.
And you haven't had any legal training, correct?
Correct.
Could we have your testimony, Ms. Williams' testimony, North Kern 85, put up on the screen? And I'd like to specifically go to page 4, paragraph 8. Actually, so page 4 and page 5, but let's start on the bottom of page 4, Ms. Mullen. One more page, Ms. Mullen. I'm sorry. Yeah, I think it's page 1 is the cover page is not counted. So it would be that page perfectly. Thanks. Paragraph 8. Let's start with that sentence. Ms. Williams, you say that it is your understanding that the forfeiture judgment became effective in April 2007 and that it has been reflected in the flow and diversion records each year since 2007. First of all, I think I know the answer, but were you working for the city of Bakersfield in 2007?
Yes,
Were you working in the water resources department?
yes.
What was your job title or position in April 2007?
Canal Tender 2, which is a dispatcher.
So you weren't involved in preparing the flow and diversion records at that time?
No,
When did you first become involved in the preparation of the flow and diversion records?
2010.
So what do you base this statement on?
Which statement? On
The-
number 8?
Yeah, that paragraph, that sentence on the bottom of page 4, the first sentence in paragraph 8. You say it's your understanding, and I want to know what that understanding is based on. How did you obtain that understanding?
Well, that's what I was trained and told when I was at the city of Bakersfield.
And you say that the forfeiture judgment is reflected in the flow and diversion records. What do you mean by reflected?
Well, you can see on the flow and diversion record that water was released to the river from the Kern Delta rights.
So your statement is the flow and diversion records reflect the fact that Kern Delta is releasing water based on the 2007 decision, correct?
Yes,
Okay. That's all you're saying is the flow and diversion records reflect what's happened, right?
yes.
Let's go to on that same exhibit 85. This is going to get, well, not that confusing. Ms. Mullen, if you could go back to page 1 of which is actually page 2 of the PDF, page 1 of the testimony. Yeah, great. So I'm looking at paragraph 1, that very last paragraph where you say, lastly, I am responsible for supervising the administration of various district, Lake Isabella and Kern River operations, records and reports, agreements, exchanges, water purchases or sales, and water banking and exchange programs managed by the district. And by district, you're talking about North Kern, right? You're not talking
Yes.
about your time with the city of Bakersfield. Okay.
Yes, correct.
When you say sales, what sales are you referring to?
Sales by the district?
But sales of water, right?
Yes.
What water has North Kern sold during your employment there? And let me clarify that. By sales, does this mean sales outside of the district or sales inside the district?
Inside.
Okay. So when you say sales, you're just talking about selling water within the district, is that right?
Yes.
Do you have any understanding as to whether North Kern has ever sold Kern River water to anyone outside of the boundaries of North Kern?
I do not know that.
Then in that same sentence, right before sales, you talk about, well, if we talk about exchanges, and then later on you talk about exchange programs. Let's start with exchanges. What do you mean by exchanges?
We have banking partners.
What do you mean by that?
There's other water entities that bank water within the district.
So you're talking about exchange programs within the boundaries of North Kern?
Yes.
Let me cut to the chase. Are you aware of any instance or time when North Kern has allowed Kern River water diverted by North Kern to leave the district for use outside of the district?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. So when there's an exchange, the Kern River water doesn't leave the district, right?
Correct.
And you're aware there's a place of use restriction in the 1952 agreement?
I saw that on the screen.
You weren't aware of that before you saw it on the screen?
Like I said, it's been some time since I've read the agreement.
It's been some time, what?
Since I've read the agreement.
All right. And you were involved, I believe you testified, you were involved in preparation of the flow and diversion records for the city of Bakersfield towards the end of your tenure with the city of Bakersfield, correct?
Yes,
You're no longer involved in the preparation of those records, correct?
that's correct.
Let me ask you this question. And I asked Mr. I these questions, but I want to ask you some of these questions now since you actually prepared the flow and diversion records. If you're familiar with the concept of entitlement, is that right?
Yes, gross entitlement.
Yeah, what does gross entitlement mean to you?
It's the distribution of the computed natural flow of the day.
I'm sorry.
It's the distribution of the computed natural flow for the day.
So the distribution of computed natural flow, meaning, well, on a given day, there's a certain amount of flow in the river, and that's distributed to various rights, correct?
Yes,
And if there's sufficient flow to reach a right, they're deemed to have gross entitlement, correct?
yes,
And they divert water under that gross entitlement, correct?
yes,
Okay, and if there's not enough flow to reach certain rights, they don't have gross entitlement, correct?
yes,
And they don't divert water under their gross entitlement.
yes,
But they may still, a right without gross entitlement sometimes still diverts water released by more senior rights, correct?
yes.
And that's a separate category or supply of water, correct?
Objection argumentative. Separate supply of water. We've got one Kern River. It's one supply of water.
I think, Mr.
More-
Pierce, can you define for me what it is you're getting at? What do you mean by a separate supply of water in your question?
Well, I mean, it's a separate category of water, right? I mean, Ms. Williams said she's defined gross entitlement. So if somebody diverts release water, that's not part of the gross entitlement, right, Ms. Williams?
Well, it's still part of the gross water for that day. It's still part of the Kern River water.
Okay, it's still Kern River water, but it doesn't get counted as part of the gross entitlement, right?
It's released to the river at that point.
Okay, it's put in a different column on the daily diversion sheet though, right?
Yes,
And if this is the question, I mean, this is all background. I want to get to the question I want to ask is if a water right or a canal right on the river has gross entitlement available on a given day up to the full entitlement, and release water is also available, isn't it true that that right only diverts the gross entitlement?
Objection. In that question, we've got three uses of the word entitlement: gross entitlement, full entitlement. It's unintelligible.
I think I'll overrule the objection. Ms. Williams, did you understand? Did you follow the question? Do you feel that you understood the question?
Not fully, no.
Okay, well then, that's what's important if the witness doesn't understand the question. So Mr. Pierce, can you be more specific about the entitlements?
Sure. Ms. Williams, you've identified what you understand gross entitlement to be. Does each right have a separate entitlement amount?
They just have up to their maximum diversion rate.
Okay, maximum diversion right. So if gross entitlement is available up to the maximum diversion right, you understand me so far?
Yes,
Okay. And also release water is available. Does that right take, what water does that right take, if any?
if it already has the maximum diversion rate, then they wouldn't have any.
I'm sorry, you trailed off there.
If they already have the full maximum diversion rate, they would not receive any.
So they would not take the release water, correct?
Correct.
They would only divert up to the maximum entitlement under their gross entitlement, correct?
Yes,
Okay. And the release water would just pass by and be, in theory, diverted by someone further downstream, right?
yes,
Okay, not by the next most junior right, correct? Necessarily, right?
correct.
Let me double check. I may be done. Well, one last question, one last subject. Are you involved, and maybe you say this in your testimony, North Kern places orders for water, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Excuse me. And they, does that happen on a daily basis?
Yes, it does.
And North Kern places orders with the city of Bakersfield, correct?
Yes,
And you've been involved on both sides of that equation, correct? You've worked for the city of Bakersfield receiving orders, and now you're involved in placing orders with North Kern, correct?
that's correct.
Okay. When North Kern, this is only during your employment for North Kern, when North Kern places an order for water, do they request a quantity of water, a specific quantity of water?
Yes,
Can you give me an example? Like in what amount would North Kern ask for a quantity of water?
it's all based off of our demand. So, I mean, we could call and ask for 100 CFS at the head of the Beardsley, for instance.
100 CFS as,
At the head of the Beardsley.
Are you aware that North Kern has a standing order for any water available to its rights or to the rights under the 52 agreement?
A standing, what do you mean by a standing order?
Well, if any water is available, North Kern will take it.
Yes,
That's your understanding that North Kern, it's basically has a request for any water available at any time. Is that right?
yes, we're available to take water at any time.
Okay. You don't differentiate between what rights or what classification. North Kern just wants any water it can take, right?
Yes,
That's all I have. Thank you, Ms. Williams.
At this point, I will look to the room, the larger room. Do any of the parties have questions for either Mr. Hampton or Ms. Williams?
Yes, hearing officer Kinsey, this is Adam Keats on behalf of the public interest organizations. We have a few questions for Mr. Hampton.
All right, thank you, Mr. Keats. Does anyone else have any questions for either witness? Then as soon as we get Mr. Hampton back on screen and on audio, I will turn things over to you, Mr. Keats, to ask your questions.
Can you hear me okay?
So far, so good.
Okay.
Please proceed when you're ready.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Hampton. I just have a few quick questions for you. If we could load up North Kern Exhibit 67 on paragraph 17. Thank you. That's perfect. Are you aware of whether North Kern ever chooses to convey its supply of Kern River water down the additional 7 miles of river below the Callaway Canal to the Pioneer Canal Inlet, into the Cross Valley Canal, and back to the North Kern Water Service District, instead of moving water directly to North Kern via the Beardsley and Callaway Canals?
I am not aware.
Thank you. In the Cross Valley Canal, is there any pumping infrastructure that North Kern can use in the Cross Valley Canal to recover groundwater from that area, that region?
So just for clarification, you referred to pumping in the canal, and then you referred to groundwater pumping. So there are no groundwater well pumpings in the canal that I'm aware of. Pumps, I'm aware of. There are pumps that lift the water upstream in the canal. North Kern certainly doesn't have any access to, that I'm aware of, does not have any access to groundwater pumping in that area.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for clarifying that. That is what I was getting at. Could
Yeah.
I guess a more lay version of that question was, is there a mechanism that you're aware of that North Kern could use to utilize the Cross Valley Canal to move water that it pumped from underneath the Kern River?
Yeah, North Kern does not have any groundwater wells.
Are you aware of North Kern taking into any of its decision-making and actions regarding Kern River water diversions, the public trust implications of those diversions?
No, I'm not aware.
And are you aware of North Kern ever having conducted a public trust analysis of public trust impacts for any of its diversion, any of its actions or decisions regarding the diversion of forfeiture release water from the Kern River?
No,
Are you aware of any conversations or discussions within North Kern regarding a requirement or a need or a desire to conduct a public trust analysis of those decisions or actions?
I'm not aware of it.
Are you aware of how North Kern's diversion of forfeiture release water may have or may continue to or may have in the past impacted public trust resources?
So can you repeat that just so I understand the question?
Sure. Are you aware of how in any way North Kern's diversion of forfeiture release water may have in the past or presently or in the future impact public trust resources on the Kern River below those diversion points?
No, I'm not aware.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Keats. I had, I have some questions that I'll try, and because Mr. Hampton, you're sitting here in front of me, I'll direct them to you and let me know if you're the right person. I just wanted to understand in a little more detail the process that occurs for North Kern, as an example, for North Kern to receive water or divert water from the Kern River is it correct that North Kern makes, I don't know if it's a phone call or makes a request to someone and to divert water? And my question is, who is that request made to and how often? Is that a daily basis, weekly, monthly? Can you explain that to me? Please?
Yeah, I will try, and if it's okay, I can have Ms. Williams correct me or
Sure.
add in. From what I understand, it's a daily order put in with the city, and they do the diversions into the canals.
And so if you were going to not divert, if there was a gross entitlement under the North Kern rights via the 1952 agreement, and you didn't intend, North Kern did not intend to divert its full gross entitlement, and so there was release water, is that something you would convey to the city on a daily basis?
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand your question.
The question is if the city would be informed on a daily basis whether or not North Kern intended to divert its full gross entitlement for that day. Is that accurate?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, I think that answers my question. I just
Okay.
wanted those details about, I was just wondering how this actually works in process, and it occurs, all of this occurs as I understand on a daily basis, that there's daily communication, you know, with the exception maybe of holidays, I don't know, with the city of Bakersfield. Is that right?
I think it's even during holidays.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That answers my questions. Mr. Cooney, do you have redirect for either of your witnesses?
I do not.
With that, I think Mr. Hampton and Ms. Williams, I know you're off camera now, but thank you both of you for being here. Thank you for your testimony. I appreciate your joining us today, and you are excused.
Yeah, thank you.
And then Mr. Cooney, is this accurate that this concludes the presentation of testimony from your witnesses for this phase?
It does. It does. Hearing Officer Kunze,
Thank you.
yes.
It's 4:02, so let's make a plan. The next step would be to consider the admission of North Kern's exhibits into the evidentiary record. And then after that, I'd like to move to this issue of the AHO exhibits and the request to add to the administrative record. I suspect once we're done with that, we're essentially going to be out of time or close to it for purposes of rebuttal. My understanding, Mr. Pierce, is you have one rebuttal witness. Is that Mr. Core? Is that right?
Yes, that's correct, Ms. Kunze. Mr.
And do you have
Corzar, we submitted some testimony, rebuttal testimony from him a few days ago.
Yes. And do you have a rough estimate of how much time it would take for him to present that rebuttal testimony?
Well, hard to say because of cross-examination, but
Right.
I think the direct could be maybe 10 minutes, maybe less.
And then I'll look to Mr. Pierce. I understand it may be hard to anticipate, but to some extent, what do you anticipate would be your, assuming, I know I haven't made a ruling on, you have a pending objection to some of the Mr. Core's rebuttal testimony, but assuming that he does testify with respect to all of his written or summarizing all of his written testimony, what is your estimate as far as cross-exam of Mr. Core?
I would imagine it's 10 minutes or so. It's not lengthy.
Thank you. So based on that, it sounds to me like we can finish today if we press forward and we don't hold ourselves to a hard 5 p.m. stop. Do either of you have any objections if we make an attempt within a reasonable period of time to wrap this up today? Because I think we have a shot at it, maybe more like 5:30 that we end with something like that. Would you be willing to power through, Mr. Pierce?
Yes. I would
within
be.
reason.
Within reason, yeah. 5:30 seems reasonable, and I'm hopeful. I know Ms. Ainsley is. She can also pipe in, but I trust she'll probably take the same position.
And and with the willingness and cooperation of Mr. Core, I appreciate that as well.
Oh, actually, I do think we may need to have Ms. Ainsley leave at 5. Oh, wait, now she's saying never mind. So, okay. I know unlike me, I think Ms. Ainsley does have maybe some childcare issues.
Yes,
But,
no, I realize those of us with small children are sometimes,
well, we're less than small children, still have responsibilities.
yeah,
Sometimes bigger ones.
big children, yeah.
Yeah.
And Mr. Cooney, can I ask you to maybe stay a little longer than 5 p.m.? That work for you?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll do what we can to get this wrapped up.
Okay. And then the remaining parties, I don't want to downplay your involvement. Are there any objections to trying to wrap this up today?
No objections, but I apologize in advance that I'm probably going to have to cut off at 5:15, but I'm okay with you continuing it if I cut off at that time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Keats. Thank you for letting me know. Let's go ahead. I do want to take a 5-minute break for all of us that we can do that. We'll come back. We will go straight to looking at North Kern's exhibits and admitting those into evidence. So let's take 5 minutes. We'll come back at 4:11 p.m. and we'll get started. Thank you.
Hey,
I have to be
Yes.
done by 5:50. Can't
Five-
go beyond that. 10
Yes.
minutes to 6.
Got it. We absolutely will
My
not
heart
go past
stopped.
5:50. That is absolutely, yes. And I'm not
Okay.
saying cut it close.
Now,
Thank
should
you
we
for letting me know.
completely sign off or keep it open?
No, we don't need to sign off. We have,
Okay.
so we're going to keep it open. We're just
Okay,
taking 5
okay.
minutes.
Very
We'll
good.
come right back. Thank you.
thank you.
All right, are we ready to go back on the record here?
Yes.
Great. At this time, Mr. Cooney, would you like to offer into the evidentiary record North Kern exhibits 1 through 97?
We would actually,
Or should we do them all? Are we going to
we
do
would do
1
them
through-
all. We would say 1 to 101, the
Okay,
whole list.
so that's, and just to clarify for the record, that's 1 through 97 was submitted by North Kern as part of your case in chief, and then
Yes.
98 through 101 as rebuttal evidence.
Yeah, to which we have examined on and we addressed, and yes, all of it.
And then Mr. Pierce or Ms. Ainsley, I realize you had filed, you have 2 pending motions. One is, well, one I addressed yesterday. You had a motion to exclude with respect to exhibits 45 through 54, and then also I think portions of or all of exhibit 1. I overruled those objections yesterday morning. You also have, with the and then you also had objections to portions of the testimony of Mr. Where is it? I have it down as North Kern 67, and now I don't recall the witness, but I know you had objections to paragraphs.
It was
27.
Mr. Hampton.
Hampton.
Yeah, and we
20
have not prepared a redacted version, but we do intend to do that, and
Sure.
that could be admitted subject to the further redaction that you ordered.
Yeah, and our, excuse me, for our clarity, we understood your ruling with regard to, there are 2 paragraphs relating to urbanization, to which we understood that those would be redacted. So we understood that one. So when we move 67, we're with that ruling reflected.
Yes, okay.
I think let me double check. I thought there were 3 paragraphs actually, just for
There were
clarity.
3. It was paragraphs 27 through 29. We have completed the redacted copy. We were holding off because North Kern's testimony actually attaches exhibits, and we were trying to wait and make sure that we didn't have any further objections to those exhibits that are attached to Mr. Hampton's testimony. So, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Ms. Kenzie.
I was gonna say, and that's fine. We don't need to have it. I mean, within a reasonable period of time would be just fine. So thank you.
But we do have objections to, we do have 3 more objections. Well, objections to 3 more exhibits that are very brief.
Okay, and are those exhibits 1 through, are they any of the exhibits 1 through 97?
One of them is, we were waiting to see what occurred on cross, but just briefly, and they can all be considered together. I was
Great.
very much trying to keep track, but 3 exhibits, I believe, do not have any sponsoring testimony, nor were I believe they used on cross. And I have sat here today trying to figure that out, but I will accept that it is difficult without a transcript. You know, I might have missed something in cross. So I'm happy to give over those 3 exhibits, and those would be our remaining objections to North Kern exhibits 1 through 101. So whenever you're ready.
Please, I'm ready.
So in the initial set of exhibits, I could not find where North Kern 55 had been ascribed to by any witness. so it has no sponsoring testimony and no demonstrated relevance. And then in the rebuttal exhibits, I realized that Mr. Florin, the cross-examination of Mr. Core was quite long, but I do not believe that North Kern 99 was used, although I could not check a transcript. And then I do not believe that North Kern 101 was used. And again, that the objection would be, lack of demonstrated relevance to the proceeding. They just hang as submitted exhibits.
Thank you. Then I'll turn to Mr. Cooney. Do you care to respond to this objection?
Yes, I do. I start off, first of all, I don't accept the premise that there has to be a sponsoring witness for a document to be relevant to the issues at hand. With regard to North Kern 55, State Board matter for petition of reconsideration, that is a matter of official notice and record of the State Board that they sought a reinstatement of their dismissed application, and it was rejected, and that's the order. And I believe I've understood the hearing officer was going to be, that's part of the application file. So we brought it in as Exhibit 55, but it's also part of the application file that they sought reconsideration of the State Board's dismissal of their original complaint, and they were denied that on reconsideration, and that's that order. So that's 55. 98, 99, and 100 were all examined on with regard to Mr. Core, with at least one or more of those daily records. We had one in 63 and 85 and 91, and he gave testimony with regard to all three of those. And as to the last exhibit 101, this document, which is a matter of official notice and record, is a court notice of entry of judgment, relates to the EIR that we have apparently allowed to come in by the city of Bakersfield, that they profess to be a complete and final document, which in fact, that notice of entry of judgment directly contradicts that representation, because it provides that in fact, there has to be further project level evaluation of their purported flow and diversion program. So it's directly relevant to the overstatement by the city of Bakersfield. And I don't need a witness to have a court entered document talk about exactly what it says.
So I'm prepared at this point to rule on these objections. And I realize, Ms. Ainsley, that you caveated that it's a little difficult without a transcript to see if any of these are referred to, but really on
I
all
would
of
like
these.
to respond to one thing that Mr. Cooney said before you
Sure.
rule. I
You may.
apologize. I would like to say I do respectfully disagree that you do not need a witness. There was no, until this point, there was no request for an order of reference pursuant to the regulations. I think with respect to North Kern 101, Mr. Cooney's testimony as to the relevance to this proceeding is, I don't believe that that is sufficient to put a document into evidence. I've been in plenty of proceedings where people try to dump documents into the administrative record. Certainly he could have used that in cross-examination. Certainly one of his own witnesses could have introduced it. Instead, what we have now is just testimony of the attorney of record as to why Your Honor should care about this document, or perhaps it's in the record now for some future use, in which case it doesn't need to be in the record for phase 1A. My understanding is we've pretty much just completed the direct cases in chief of phase 1A, and it was not used. And indeed, North Kern has no rebuttal witnesses.
Thank you, Ms. Ainsley. And I understand your argument. I will rule on this, and I will say I on this issue, I do agree with Mr. Cooney. I don't think there has to be sponsoring testimony for exhibits necessarily. There is a more liberal standard of evidence, the acceptance of evidence in administrative proceedings, and I think that's applicable here. Now, that said, I don't want to give the impression that I'm going to, allow everything in and everything is relevant, because there is a concern about having extraneous information in the record and cluttering up the record, if you will. So I do take this seriously, but in looking at these documents, I think they, from the face of them, can understand what they are, and they are at least apparently accurate depictions of what they are, whether it's a court filed document, daily records of the type we've seen in this proceeding, and then the application, the order from the State Water Board. All of these appear to be accurate depictions of what they are. So I am going to overrule the objection and allow those into the evidentiary record. And just to make sure that I'm clear, Ms. Ainsley, are there any other objections that you have not yet raised with respect to North Kern 1 through 101?
I don't believe so.
Thank you. So with that, I will accept into the evidentiary record North Kern 1 through 101 with the appropriate redactions and subject of my evidentiary ruling with respect to North Kern 67. I think next on our agenda is to move to the consideration of the AHO exhibits. This is AHO exhibits 1 through 84. They're identified in an Excel spreadsheet that's available on the AHO FTP site that's titled 2021-1028 AHO Exhibit Index. And this exhibit index identifies documents that the AHO had made available for this proceeding in the file called Administrative Record Documents General, available on our AHO FTP site, and in the folders with respect to the application files A031673, A031674, A031675, A031676, A031677, the complaint file, and the joint water availability file. It did not include the 2009-10-26 Kern River FAS hearing file folder. And the purpose of bringing these in is that these are records that the AHO pulled from the State Water Board's files that may be relevant to this proceeding. And so I will consider moving those into the evidentiary record to the extent that they're relevant and the parties may want to rely on them. Now, I am open to hearing objections to moving any of these documents into the record, keeping in mind my prior evidentiary rulings with respect to the relevance of historical documents and documents that provide context for where we are. But given that, are there any objections to admitting AHO exhibits 1 through 84 into the evidentiary record for phase 1A of this proceeding? I guess I'll just turn first to Mr. Cooney, just in no particular order, and then I'll look to you, Ms. Ainsley and Mr. Pierce, and then the remaining parties. And Mr. Cooney, I believe you're on. Thank you.
Yeah, excuse me. So with regard to those exhibits you've referenced, they are what I'm going to call I'll call it the application file. I think that's fair that it's, it's the various applications. Our primary point really is that certainly there's no denying that these are the documents that are, included in the State Board's file. They are the various applications. We don't find that fact in any way, problematic, but we don't also find that they are any manner of direct evidence as to the 1A issue of determination of whether or not the forfeiture decision results in unappropriated water, and if so, in what amount. They're contextual, they're historical, they're records. So I guess with that explanation, I understand your position, but I also wanted our record clear that we don't find any of them to speak in any manner to the heart of the issue that is in front of you.
Understood, Mr. Cooney, and I think you've made, and I appreciate that the importance of making that point on the record. So thank you for that. Mr. Pierce or Ms. Ainsley, do you have any objections to these exhibits?
We have no objection to those exhibits, Ms. Ainsley, Ms. Coonsey.
Thank you. Are there any other parties who have objections to the admission of AHO exhibits 1 through 84? Hearing none, I'm going to admit, I am admitting into the evidentiary record AHO Exhibits 1 through 84. With that, I believe it's time to turn to North Kern's motion to, I forget the verb you used, enhance the administrative record in this proceeding by adding additional documents that you provided attached to your motion.
Right.
I read that motion. I also received and read the response from the city of Bakersfield. I still think there may be somewhat of a disconnect here. I understand the motion to be asking very narrowly, well, I don't know if it's narrowly, but the motion is not to move these documents into the evidentiary record for phase 1A or any other phase necessarily. I mean, that may come down the road, but merely to move these documents so that they're available on the AHO FTP site, and that the offer is to indicate that these are accurate depictions of documents within the files of the State Water Board, and that they would, by being moved electronically onto the AHO FTP site, they'd be available to all parties. I think I've indicated that, and was reflected in your briefings back and forth, that any party may request to either remove documents from the administrative record as irrelevant, I suppose, or to add additional documents that may be relevant. I'm going to give both of you a chance to comment, but my initial reaction to this is insofar as this is an accurate depiction of documents within the State Water Board files, it would be appropriate to make them available. And then down the road, if they are offered as into evidence, then we would consider any objections at that time. And then, of course, the city of Bakersfield would have the opportunity to offer any documents that they think is appropriate that are already within the State Water Board files, but just have not been made available electronically, and to move those so that they're electronically available on the AHO FTP site. So that's where I'm coming from. I think maybe I'll turn first to you, Ms. Ainsley, or Mr. Pierce, whether you have concerns about that approach and continue your objection to that approach.
Again, this is Jolianne Ainsley for the city of Bakersfield. I'll let Mr. Pierce also chime in because I personally was not involved with the FAS hearing back in 2009. So there may be something I misrepresent. I think that just to make sure it's clear, because when I was understanding, when someone says a motion to supplement the administrative record, it does sound like someone is asking to add to the official administrative record of a proceeding that would then be part of a record that could go up on appeal or somehow it would implicate the evidentiary record. So, but I understand what you're saying right now, Ms. Kenzie, is you're considering placing these documents, at least availability of them on the FTP site so that people could download them, but they wouldn't necessarily be part of the record for the Kern River applications proceeding. Is that correct?
I think that's accurate. And to be fair, we are evolving our process here at the AHO. So the confusion is, it's completely understandable, but I will represent to you and hold me to it, and it's in the record for this proceeding that I'm separately demarcating what I'm calling the administrative record, which is documents that may be the documents available on the AHO FTP site. That is distinct from the evidentiary record. The evidentiary record is a subset and only includes those documents who have been formally introduced and offered into evidence and accepted into evidence. And that's why I'm going through this process that I just went through with the AHO exhibits 1 through 84, so that we have a clear depiction of which documents are in the evidentiary record and may be considered for purposes of coming to a decision on this matter. So I wanted to be very clear that we have a separate evidentiary record, and that may not have been clear previously, and I understand that. So yes, that is what I'm indicating to you.
And I think that before I let Mr. Pierce have a chance to add anything specific to the FAS, I think that I have two responses. The first is that all of the FAS exhibits and indeed record are already available on the Water Board's website as part of the FAS hearing page. So it's not that there is an unavailability of the records for the FAS hearing. Indeed, very recently I've been looking at exhibits on that page. And I think what bothers me at this point is that sort of outside the process of just demonstrating any sort of relevance, North Kern is suggesting a small subset of exhibits, and indeed only exhibits that it put forward in the FAS hearing. And I'm cognizant that you said that the city of Bakersfield could also start this process of picking out what it thinks is relevant and putting it on the download folder. But I think it's more efficient either to put them a link to them all, to all the exhibits of the FAS hearing, because certainly they're all available on the water board's online files, and not to make any like threshold determinations here of relevance that starts this long-term discussion we're going to have about what is or isn't relevant. If something is relevant to this proceeding, certainly any party can mark it as an exhibit. But to, in advance, cherry pick a subset of exhibits that you think are relevant to be placed in something called the admin record, I think I'm still struggling a little bit with that concept and even why that would be necessary. I understand why the AHO office put all what it considered the application files and pleadings together. This is a proceeding regarding the applications. And so it made total sense to me that the download folder would contain what the AHO thought was the complete application files of all the 5 or 6 applications that are pending before you. But I think where I'm starting to run into problems here is this is a cherry picked subset of exhibits that now by themselves, and then obviously we'll have to come back and see what we think is relevant, but they're going to be placed in an additional folder now, just sort of on the AHO website. And I don't really see why that is necessary. I think what you've done with AHO 1 through 84 makes a lot of sense, and it could be very helpful if we need to commonly refer to a staff exhibit number. But I don't see the purpose or stated in air quotes now relevance of putting a very small subset of exhibits from the FAS hearing into this download folder with no demonstrated relevance, no cross-examination. And I understand they're not part of the evidentiary record, in which case I'm asking, why aren't these just marked as exhibits when they're needed to be part of the evidentiary record? To whom do they serve at this point is what I'm saying. So I think I still maintain my objections to this process of sort of, I don't know, maybe putting them in a temporary location before they become part of the evidentiary record. Certainly, I think this raises more procedural problems than it solves in any way, shape, or form. And I'll let Mr. Pierce weigh in because, like I said, I wasn't present for the FAS hearing, so there may be something about these exhibits that I'm not aware.
Mr. Pierce, if you'd like to weigh in.
Well, I think just maybe to summarize, I think the sense is that either they should, the exhibits from the FAS hearing, if they're going to be available on a website or on some other category, all the exhibits should be there, not a select subset. They should all be there or none should be there is I think what we're saying.
Mr. Cooney, do you care to respond?
I would love to. Here's what is transpired, and we went to the AHO FTP download folder, and there is a folder there, administrative hearing documents subfolder titled 2009-1026 Kern River FAS hearing. And we looked through those records, and they had many things that were properly included in that FAS hearing. It had the transcript, it had certain, documents, but for no reason explained and obvious, there were none of the entered exhibits that actually were part of that proceeding. So we suggested that be corrected to make this, because it purports to be administrative record, but it was incomplete. I think everybody agrees it was incomplete. So we simply, according to the rules, which we quoted in our request for a supplement and addition of those documents to that folder, we didn't suggest that it be introduced in evidence out of compliance with your order of this proceeding, that folder be updated to include those documents. And we, according to the rule, provided you those documents and all parties. And I'm certainly not troubled with anybody else wanting to make sure that whatever they think that was actually part of that record be part of the record to make it complete. Completeness was the goal. And I can't imagine that the city of Bakersfield wanted us to presumptively start grabbing documents that related to them. So we didn't. Cherry picking and arguments like that is, that's not what we were trying to do. We were simply trying to have this folder that purports to be an administrative hearing document folder become complete.
And Mr. Cooney, a question for you. The documents that you submitted, are those all of the exhibits that, if you know, from the FAS hearing, or it's a subset of the exhibits?
They were the exhibits that, not all of the exhibits in the entire proceeding. They were the exhibits that otherwise weren't referenced in our work, and they were exhibits. I don't know, we started at 30. I can't, to be honest with you, I can't recall, but they were not, the direct answer to your question, it was not all exhibits that were in the entirety of the file. It was not that. It was a subset of those that we had identified that we thought should be included that were omitted by, again, I don't know what the logic of the omission was, but we saw that they were just not complete.
I can explain the logic of the omission, which is that our office is a staff of 7. So I can tell you exactly what went on there, which is there's quite a number of exhibits, and it sounds like it should be easy, but it's more difficult than one might think to appropriately obtain the digital copies of all those files. And in fact, the easiest way for us to do that is to download them ourselves and then move them over, which takes some amount of time, and to rename all those files. So what I think makes sense here, and I'm wondering if you two can work together on this, it sounds like what might make sense is to move all of the exhibits from the FAS hearing into the record one way or another. And what I might ask, and I don't think we're not talking about doing this for purposes of this evidentiary record for phase 1A, so I think we have some time to do this. So what I would ask is if we can, I'm not going to act on this motion right now. What I'd ask is if your offices respectively, and maybe the other parties, I don't know how much work that entails, so I don't want to put out a direction to one or another party to grab all those and download them and offer them to us. But what I'm asking is if you can work together to download those exhibits. I understand they're on the FAS hearing webpage. It is easier to have them in the AHO FTP folder for various reasons, at least for my office, and I suspect for other people, to rename those files individually so that it's not one big PDF document, but we can have them as individual exhibit files, and then upload those at an appropriate time to the AHO, one of your AHO FTP upload folders. And at that time, we can move them over onto the AHO FTP download folder where they'll be available to the public. That's my proposal as to what to do. Ms. Ainsley, does that, do you have any objections to that approach?
No, I mean, I think it's one or the other, like you're saying. I personally don't think it's wholly necessary at that point, but if the hearing officer would like that done, I think it should be done. My understanding, though, just to make sure there's a clarification, is this is not even all of the exhibits that the North Kern and the joint petitioners in this FAS hearing, this is not a complete set of even those exhibits. Are you asking us now to make sure that there's a complete set of the admitted exhibits and testimony from the FAS hearing as it's posted on the Water Board's website right now, which is a hyperlinked?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Correct.
You would like it to be complete. We're either doing nothing or doing it complete.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. And Mr. Cooney.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I agree with that.
That works.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Yes, absolutely. I agree.
No, I don't think I asked. So I want to make sure you have a chance. Are there any I'll turn to any other parties, any objections to that approach? Anyone have any concerns? All right, with that housekeeping, I think we're ready to move on to the City of Bakersfield rebuttal witness. Is that correct? Does anyone else have anything to raise before we move to Mr. Core? All right, then. I will give you a few moments. I see Mr. Core is linked in, but not yet on video. Good afternoon, Mr. Core. Thank you for sticking with us today. I appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure.
Do you recall yesterday taking the oath in this proceeding?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Then I won't repeat that again today. Mr. Pierce or Ms. Ainsley, please go ahead and proceed with your rebuttal testimony.
Thank you. It'll be me, Ms. Kunze. And again, for the record, Colin Pierce for the city of Bakersfield. Mr. Core, good afternoon. And once again, you're still under oath. You realize that, correct?
I understand, yes.
Okay. Is exhibit Bakersfield 113 a true and correct copy of your rebuttal testimony in this proceeding?
Yes, it is.
Could you give us a summary of your rebuttal testimony, please?
I will do so. I previously submitted the, it's Exhibit Bakersfield 7 as part of my testimony. I provided rebuttal testimony to respond and address errors and misstatements in the testimony submitted by the North Kern Water Storage District, or North Kern, and in particular, the testimony of Ron Ide and David Hampton. North Kern's witnesses collectively and in general do not accurately describe the actual practices and procedures for the diversion of what's called forfeiture releases. North Kern's witnesses, Ron Ide and Dave Hampton, additionally do not accurately describe or characterize North Kern's limited right to divert water accruing to certain rights owned by the city of Bakersfield pursuant to the North Kern's 1952 agreement. North Kern's witnesses continually, by the way, can everybody hear me? Is that okay? Okay. North Kern's witnesses continually claim or assume that North Kern has diverted release water, and specifically forfeiture release, pursuant to the 52 agreement, or what's called the law of the river. That testimony is not accurate or complete, or at the very least is misleading. Historically, and during my employment with Bakersfield's Water Resources Department, North Kern did not practically, or as a matter of record, divert release water or forfeiture release based on or pursuant to the 1952 agreement, or as part of the entitlements for the rights listed in the 1952 agreement. Instead, North Kern has historically only diverted release water or forfeiture releases when it did not have any base entitlement or gross entitlement to the water under the 52 agreement, or when it did not have all of its entitlement on a given day. In my experience and during my course of employment with Bakersfield, if release water or forfeiture water was available on the Kern River, but North Kern had entitlement under the rights listed in the 1952 agreement, and based on the flow of the river for that day, North Kern only diverted up to the entitlement for the right listed in the 1952 agreement and did not divert any release water or forfeiture releases. The release water was instead diverted by the next junior right on the river without any entitlement or right to water on that day under any water right. Diversions of release water and forfeiture releases were always based on a lack of entitlement or a lack of water accruing to or belonging to a specific junior right instead of based on any entitlement to the water. In addition, historically, Bakersfield and its predecessors maintained that the party releasing water still had a right to that released water.
Ms. Kinsey, if I could, this is Brett Stroud. I'd like to interpose an objection at this point. And I know that you said you would address our motion about Mr. Core's rebuttal testimony, but at this point, he testified yesterday that he hadn't worked for or had any personal knowledge of the practices of the Kern County Land Company, Bakersfield's predecessor. We objected that he's not qualified to give opinions about these general matters of historical practice or other parties other than the city of Bakersfield. We can address the motion after his testimony if that's the way you'd like to do it, but I wanted to make the objection now since he's getting into those matters.
Let's pause for a moment and make sure. Give me a second. While I flip through documents, I want to pull up your motion here. I think we should, and I apologize for being out of order. I think it does make sense for me to address the motion with respect to testimony first, so that we can have an understanding of what Mr. Core can testify about. I apologize for being out of order here. I have read, so I guess, Mr. Stroud, you nicely summarized, I think, your objection. Is there anything at this point that you'd like to add? And then I'll turn to Mr. Pierce if he cares to respond, and then I'll make a ruling on this issue.
I think I stated it pretty clearly. That you said you've read the motion. There are other grounds based on your earlier rulings on objections in this case. I think some of them you've already sort of addressed, the general topics of legal testimony by lay witnesses. I think we all have an understanding about that. But this issue of his purporting to give historical opinions about the practices of other parties in the city of Bakersfield, I think that's something he's not qualified to speak about.
Thank you, Mr. Stroud. Mr. Pierce, would you like to respond?
Yes, I think Mr. Core did testify at length actually about his knowledge and experience with historical practices based on his longtime employment for the city of Bakersfield and his experience on the Kern River. I think that's been established that he is really, in essence, an expert on the Kern River and on the operations of the Kern River. And I think, again, that was in his direct testimony yesterday that was admitted. Otherwise, I think, again, kind of like we said in our papers in opposition to the motion to eliminate, you've already ruled against North Kern on these issues. You've already indicated that you believe you can, or you can address testimony which may touch on legal issues, especially ones that involve the witness's understanding and then the application of certain historic documents. Mr. Core's testimony, his rebuttal testimony, primarily relates to clarifications and explanations as to how the city of Bakersfield has actually maintained and kept records to try to clarify and correct some of the statements from North Kern's witnesses who have not been involved in the preparation of these records. So that's, I don't want to belabor the point. Again, I think you've already addressed North Kern's objections yesterday and response to their prior motion to eliminate. So I'll leave it at that unless you have further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Pierce. I'm going to overrule the objection and allow the entirety of Mr. Core's rebuttal testimony. As you noted, Mr. Stroud, some of those objections were already overruled, essentially similar objections overruled by me in the evidentiary ruling of yesterday morning, of course, which you were not aware of when drafting the motion. In addition, I will just add that I think the objections and the concerns with respect to potential limitation on Mr. Core's knowledge will be taken into account in weighing the evidence when coming to a determination. So your objections are noted. Your briefing is helpful to me, and those issues will be, I will consider those issues when considering the weight of the evidence. So with that, thank you, Mr. Stroud. Thank you, Mr. Pierce, and Mr. Core, if you would please proceed with your testimony.
Thank you.
Could you read back where I left off? Please.
I think Ms. Court Reporter, you're on mute. Ms. Dice. So if you're reading to us, we can't hear you.
I'm not reading, I'm trying to find it.
I apologize. And now I bumped us down, so I'll be quiet.
Okay, oh, no, that's not it either. Okay. In addition, historically, Bakersfield and its predecessors maintain that the party releasing water will still have a right to that released water. And that's when the objection came in.
Okay. I want to start again on this. In addition, historically, Bakersfield and its predecessors maintained that party releasing water still had a right to release water and was releasing water that would be specifically used by an entity or water right without any right to the water. Diversion of released water and forfeiture releases was therefore historically not based on the right to the water, but instead based on a lack of any water rights or any water right, any right to the released water. Released water and forfeiture releases has not been considered or accounted for by Bakersfield as the record keeper and operator of the river as part of the 1952 agreement, or as part of the entitlement available to North Kern under the 52 agreement. References by North Kern witnesses to the law of the river and to diversions of released water for forfeiture releases pursuant to the law of the river are also not accurate and do not have any practical or effective meaning or application to the actual diversion and use of water on the Kern River. Bakersfield has practically or actually referred to or relied on, excuse me, let me rephrase that. Bakersfield has not practically or actually referred to or relied on any vague concept of the law of the river in the course of operation and record keeping on the river. Bakersfield staff and managers have instead referred to the actual agreements and decisions which apply to the Kern River when necessary to determine the appropriate diversion, allocation, and use of water, or the appropriate measuring and recording of water on the Kern River. Mr. Ide's claim on page 3 in paragraph 10 of his testimony, and I will be reading that word for word here. All water in excess of the monthly forfeiture caps is shown on the flow and diversion records as being released to the Kern River for use by the next senior right. That statement is not accurate. Water in excess of the monthly forfeiture caps instead has only been diverted and used by the next most senior right without entitlement on that day when the water was available. The next most senior rights already have entitlement. If this next most senior rights already have entitlement, they do not divert or use release water or forfeiture releases. Mr. Ide's claim on paragraph 72 of page 17 that, quotes, release water is made available and distributed to the most senior diversion rights in order of right and priority up to each diversion rights existing maximum paper entitlement until the entire release water supply is exhausted is not accurate for the very same reasons. Release water is not made available and distributed to the next most senior diversion right in order of priority, but is only made available to the next most senior right without entitlement or right to water on the day when the release water is available. The release water is not considered part of the entitlement for a right by the city staff and record keepers and is not diverted as part of the entitlement, but is instead diverted outside of and separate from entitlement for any junior right. I'm also responding to testimony from David Hampton in paragraph 40 on page 10 that, quotes, ultimately, in one manner or another, all of Kern River water released to the Kern River as a result of the North Kern decision, which is allocated to North Kern, according to the water rights listed in flow and diversion records and in North Kern's 52 agreement, was diverted and applied to irrigation use within North Kern. That statement is not accurate. As I explained in my prior testimony, North Kern's 1952 agreement contains monthly caps or maximum diversion limits for each month for total combined diversions by North Kern under rights owned by Bakersfield and identified in the 1952 agreement. There have been 3 months since 2007 when North Kern reached its monthly cap for its maximum diversion right under the 1952 agreement. In December 2010, in January 2011, and December of 2017. Therefore, North Kern released a certain portion of the forfeiture releases in those months to the owner of the rights, the city of Bakersfield. North Kern's exhibit, North Kern -82 claims to show North Kern's diversions and use of forfeiture releases from Kern Delta's rights, quotes, during their respective forfeiture months, unquote. That exhibit purports to show that North Kern diverted 14,285 acre feet of forfeiture releases in December 10. The 2010 Kern River Hydrographic Annual Report on page 81, however, indicates North Kern released 15,481 acre feet of Kern River water in December of 2010, after reaching its monthly diversion cap under the 1952 agreement limit of 32,800 acre feet. Since it is the custom and practice of Bakersfield and its predecessors to only allocate release water and forfeiture releases to junior rights without entitlement, North Kern would have first diverted water accruing to its entitlement under the 1952 agreement before it could divert any forfeiture releases. The 2010 calculation by North Kern for its diversion of forfeiture releases, however, does not reflect actual custom and practices and therefore not accurate. North Kern instead appears to arbitrarily assume that any water released after they hit the diversion cap was entitlement, or water it was entitled to receive under the 1952 agreement, and they assume that they diverted forfeiture releases before they diverted any entitlement. This is not correct or accurate, as in reality, North Kern would only receive forfeiture releases if they did not have entitlement or not reached its full entitlement for all of its rights on a given day. If North Kern has already diverted water accruing to rights listed in the 1952 agreement on a given day, it would not be able to divert any forfeiture releases. In addition, once North Kern reaches its monthly diversion cap under the 1952 agreement, it would not be able to eligible to divert any forfeiture releases. The water released by North Kern December 10, therefore, has to be considered forfeiture release water, not entitlement water, as North Kern would have necessarily been considered to have diverted entitlement prior to diverting any forfeiture releases. North Kern therefore released forfeiture releases in December 10, and Bakersfield diverted the water released by North Kern, including the forfeiture releases.
Thank you,
That's
Mr. Core. Thank you, Mr. Core. Does that conclude the summary of your rebuttal testimony?
It does.
At this time, Ms. Kunze, City of Bakersfield would like to move Exhibit Bakersfield 113, Mr. Core's rebuttal testimony, into evidence. You're on mute, Ms. Kunze.
Thank you. Will you clarify for me, is that the only rebuttal exhibit?
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I guess he's going to have cross-examination first. But,
Right.
That
that.
yes, that is the only rebuttal.
This is the only, but let's go ahead. We'll do it at the end. In any case, we'll go through cross and then we'll move it into evidence. So at this point, Mr. Pierce, just to be clear, does that conclude the presentation of your rebuttal witness and rebuttal testimony?
Well, subject to cross-examination and then perhaps even some redirect, but
Yes.
otherwise, yes.
Thank you. That is yes.
Thanks. I'm sorry. It's been a long 2 days, so sorry about that.
Mr. Cooney, I'll turn to you. I presume you have cross-examination questions for this witness.
No, actually, we've made our objections as to the competency of the representations, and we have no need to cross this witness in that matter at all.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Cooney. I will turn to the rest of the room. Are there any other parties who have questions for Mr. Core on his rebuttal testimony? And I don't have any questions at this time. So I believe there would be no basis for redirect, Mr. Pierce. And with that, Mr. Core, thank you for staying with us. I appreciate your testimony today and yesterday, and you are excused.
Thank you.
And then, Mr. Pierce, I think now is the appropriate time to seek to move Bakersfield Exhibit 113 into evidence. Do you so move?
Yes, Ms. Kunze, we move Bakersfield Exhibit 113 into evidence at this time.
And I received objections from North Kern that I overruled. I guess, Mr. Cooney, do you have anything else to add, given that I've heard your objections and addressed those? Do you have any other comments at this time before I admit?
No additional objections.
Thank you. Do any other parties have objections to Bakersfield 113? With that, then I will accept into evidence Bakersfield 113. And I think that concludes, we may have some housekeeping matters, but that concludes the presentation of cases in chief and rebuttal evidence in phase 1A of this proceeding. Does anyone care to correct me on that before we move on to housekeeping items such as closing briefs? So I'll just turn first to Mr. Pierce. Am I correct to assume that you would be interested in submitting a closing brief with respect to phase 1A?
Yes.
And Mr. Cooney, do you have any objections, or do you also have the same inclination?
Yeah, we do have the same inclination and actually have some thoughts for your consideration, or you can lead with your own preferences.
Well, I don't have a lot of preferences other than to say I think closing briefs would be helpful. As I had said before, I don't anticipate that the AHO will be issuing any kind of ruling on phase 1A alone. I think it makes sense to consider whether to issue a ruling once we've heard phase 1B. But I do think closing briefs would be helpful. I realize the holidays are coming up and we aren't under urgent time pressure because I do need to set a schedule for phase 1B. I want this to move along, but it's not entirely critical. So I would be open to your suggestions, both about length of the closing briefs and the timing of those closing briefs.
Ms. Kunze, one of the issues, and I appreciate your thoughts about the holidays, that it'd be nice not to work on this over the holidays, but one of the bigger factors is really the timing on the transcript. We'd like to have access to the transcript when we're doing our brief. So we don't necessarily need to, if you're not trying to push this along or rush this along, we don't necessarily need to push the court reporter either, but it'd be nice to get a sense as to when we would get the transcript.
And that I would have to turn to Mr. Cooney. I believe you have the relationship with the court reporter and you may not know the answer to that.
We have the relationship and it's been great, but we certainly don't control what she can do, and I appreciate she's worked very hard to get to this point. And I agree with Mr. Pierce that obviously that's, a first step to being able to do appropriate briefing for you. So,
well, what we can do, what I propose is maybe we can set out the closing brief deadline based on when you receive the transcript, and then it would be somewhat of a moving target, but then it would be set.
Right.
What do you think of that? Mr. Pierce, what do you think of that proposal?
Yeah, within reason. I mean, if we get the transcript next week, then we'd still want enough time to not spend a lot of time on it over the holidays. So I don't know how you want to determine the due date from the date of the transcript being done.
If I may,
please,
Marine Officer Kunze, I want to step back here for a second. And I know that you have indicated that you're, at least so far, not thinking that there would be a phase 1A ruling. I'm going to suggest to you that's really not wise, and I think it would be more appropriate that we actually have one. And here's why. I mean, I'm going to come back to your metaphor of eating the elephant one bite at a time. You've now taken a very big bite. It's been a lot of information. I think it is relating, of course, to a very discrete issue that you've teed up as you have in your status order and your legal rulings. And I think you need to be able to digest it and to be able to rule on it before you get to a whole new chapter that we started off. And we know it's different. All of 1B and high flow waters, intertidal waters, all of those are different matters. And I'll suggest also, because not only of this being a discrete issue, it's been one that's been, separately legal briefed in advance. It also has a history that is unique from the phase 1B issues in that it was deferred at that time. It's been a long time since 2010 when we had the decision. It's time, I think, actually, for there to be a ruling to answer the foundational question that you raised, and that is, did the forfeiture decision unto itself result in unappropriated water, and if so, in what amount? the resolution of that and whatever your disposition be is an issue completely unrelated to whether or not there may be something to do with high flow waters and other claims and interests that may be associated with 1B. But it would really be unfortunate to have framed this issue, had legal briefing, put on the evidence that you can now, as you indicated, you wanted to be able to apply the facts to the law. Now you have the facts, you've got the law. I think it's incumbent really on you to ask you that you need to make that ruling as to what it is. It may not be determinative of this proceeding because obviously it relates to the Kern River proceeding. It's a step in this proceeding, but it is unique and deserves direct attention, and it needs to be, as I go back to your analogy, you need to have it digested, you need to have it articulated, because I think it's going to be a predicate and it's going to be informative to the next phase, whenever that may be and whatever your schedule is. So that's our request. In terms of back to briefing issues, and sort of triangulate between the court reporter being able to get her work done and us being able to navigate all of us through holidays, I would suggest an opening brief be due, let's say January 21, which was a little bit, we're not going to likely get a transcript for a couple of weeks. That's going to be right in the middle of the holiday period. This is a matter of substance to deserve, for an initial brief. And I'm actually going to suggest that the record shows that there probably should be simultaneous opening briefs and simultaneous responsive briefs, probably 10 days after. That would be January 31. And I've got ideas about, pages for the opening. There's a lot of evidence and argument to be put to paper, probably in the range of 30 pages, and a responsive brief, probably, and half of that not to exceed 15 pages. And then you will have all of the legal briefing, all of the forceful legal arguments, and you'll be able to digest your first bite and then put one bite of the elephant on the shelf, and it will be a ruling that is, again, in your procedure as to, it may not be a final ruling, but it is an articulated final application of the issue of the law to these facts and a direct answer to the issue that has been awaiting an answer since at least 2010, and that is, did the forfeiture decision result in unappropriated water? And more importantly, did Bakersfield prove that that's the case? So that's my request.
Thank you, Mr. Cooney. And then I will turn to Mr. Pierce on those issues.
Kenzie, we have no objection to you waiting until after phase 1B to issue your decision. If that's your preference, if that would be preferable to you and the administrative hearing office, we have no objection to that. And I guess I would say I don't have a strong opinion on that, although I do think that the more you know about the Kern River, the more you learn through phase 1B. I think the more that'll benefit you as well as everyone else. This proceeding has been a long time coming, as they say. So I don't, if we have to wait a little longer, we'll deal with that. So yeah, I don't, like I said, I don't have a strong preference. I tend to think, I guess the only real concern might be is just from a practical procedural standpoint. If you have a phase 1A decision, is that an interim ruling? What do we, how is that going to work practically? It just seems a little more efficient and practical to wait, as you suggested, till later on. In terms of the briefing, the schedule does seem a little accelerated. I'm not sure if I want to come back from the holidays and have to do a 30-page brief in 2 weeks, given the fact that I've been pushing a lot of other work off until after this hearing. So I would suggest more along the lines of early February, and then 30 pages. I guess I wouldn't object to that. And I do like the idea of simultaneous opening briefs and simultaneous reply briefs, but I think given the length of the brief and the number and the amount of evidence, I think we would at least want 15 days, if not longer, to respond to the opening briefs. So again, just to be clear, and I don't have a specific date in mind, I'm looking more towards early to mid-February for the opening briefs. And I think I would say that's assuming that we'll get the transcript by early January.
And in terms
I
of
will
that,
promise you the transcript by early January.
Thank you. Thank you.
and I don't have any objection to Mr. Pierce suggesting, early February and a little bit more time between the two briefs. He's right. We're pushing both ends of the stick at the same time, and they're both on fire. So, I understand.
I will note, yes.
Ms. Kinsey, thank you, Hearing Officer Ryan Becerra for Buena Vista Water Storage District. I don't believe we would intend to brief these issues, but we would agree with Mr. Cuny that a phase 1A decision before we proceed into phase 1B would be preferable. And I say that because to use Mr. Cuny's metaphor, I do think it makes good sense to put one bite of the elephant on the shelf before we go into the next phase. Otherwise, we'll have a lot of issues about, well, what's left pending and what evidence can be presented or not presented. And should somebody get a chance to possibly present evidence on stuff that may or may not have been in phase 1A. I think we do need to wrap that up, I think, before we continue into phase 1B. I think the two blocks of water are pretty distinguishable, and it does make good sense to do them separately. So, I mean, obviously we can proceed to organize phase 1B while we're awaiting a phase 1A decision, but I would encourage you to conclude phase 1A with an order before we proceed into a phase 1B hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Becerra. I think I don't want to make a decision today about whether or not when the timing of a ruling or an order, however it may be framed. I think that's maybe an appropriate conversation to continue at a whether we call it a pre-hearing conference or a status conference at some point in the future. I would be interested in your thoughts at that time about the AHO's authority. There is this issue of what would such a ruling be? Is some kind of interlocutory ruling? Is it something that would go to the board? What would it be exactly? That's an important element here. On the briefing, I think what I'd like to do is let's go ahead and, well, let me, with that in mind, are there any other comments from any of the parties about the briefing schedule or the length or other related matters that have been brought up? All right, so what I think we should do is right now, I'm going to set a briefing schedule for, I guess they're initial closing briefs, because they are closing briefs, but the initial closing briefs will be due February 1st. That's what I was looking at. And we'll limit those to 30 pages, double spaced. And then reply briefs due simultaneously on February 15th, and limiting those to 15 pages, double spaced. I will issue an order memorializing those dates for us. So you will see that coming from me. I also wanted to mention with respect to the transcript, if you are planning on, well, I'm sure you are, it sounds like you're planning on citing to the reporter's transcript. As part of that, if you're going to do that, then it would be appreciated if you made the reporter's transcript available to the AHO. Once it is available to the AHO, it is, however, publicly available. We include that on our AHO FTP site. It's part of the administrative record for this proceeding. So I understand that that may be a conversation to have with your court reporter about the appropriate mechanism to do that, knowing that the transcript will then become publicly available to all on our AHO FTP site. Even if you do cite to the reporter's transcript, we're working on this practice, but our current request at the AHO is that you also include a parallel citation to the Zoom recording. And the reason is that the Zoom recording is the official record for purposes of the proceeding. And so we do want to have those parallel citations, although I fully appreciate that if I have the reporter's transcript and you have a citation to that, that is obviously the most convenient. And so I appreciate that. With that note, are there any other items that we need to address before we break? Before we close the hearing?
Nothing further from the city of Bakersfield. Ms. Kunze, we do thank you and your staff for your time and your effort and attention to this important issue.
Thank you, Mr.
And
Pierce.
we apologize for the technical issues, especially yesterday. And I heard after the fact that we had more than I realized. So I'm sorry. I take full responsibility.
I think we worked it all out.
You.
We all had our moments, I think, in these 2 days.
Yes.
So.
Yes.
So thank you very much for all of your hard work and staff. And so we will be prepared to follow through on that schedule. And I think I'll just close with happy holidays to everybody.
Same from us as well, everybody.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you once again for your professionalism, to the witnesses for taking the time to be here. And I appreciate the work that we've put in so far. I know we'll be spending future time together next year. So thank you very much. And with that, we are closing phase 1A of this hearing. And I will see you probably in 2022. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.